everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Tetracast. This is RPG Site's weekly podcast where we get the site staff together to talk about our favorite genre of video games. We've got the full crew here today. My name is Brian Vitale. Joining me, we have Josh Torres,
Why did they name the new Gundam series that?
Adam Vitale,
Hello.
James Glazio,
GQ on my Gundam and toy ooks.
and Chaman Wu.
Someone fell asleep on the keyboard at this.
Yeah, someone's cat got on the keyboard and when
Yeah.
it was time for the name proposal meeting.
Have you seen the Italian synopsis for that story? It sounds freaking insane.
Oh yeah, I saw
Specifically the
I-
Italian synopsis?
Yeah,
What?
no. So basically, the Italian version of the website or something accidentally put up like an actual synopsis for the plot early. So now people know that it's like, oh, this is UC, but an alternate like timeline of UC.
Yeah, so to fill in listeners, so earlier this week, Sunrise announced that the new main Gundam series is a G, like it's like Gundam G capital Q, and then it's like U X, and that's the name of the new Gundam.
Was that the right number of X's?
I don't-
Was it 6 or 7?
It's the number of U's. That's numbers you
It's a
use like
U's.
one, yeah, and then one X, and then obviously English community is like, how the fuck do you pronounce this? Is it Quarks,
G-Quacks.
and then they got the katakana for it is like G Kuakus, and then so if that could be interpreted in like one of two primary ways in English. It's either G Quacks or G Quark. It could kind of go either way.
Yeah, probably G-Quirks is what people are going to go with since it just makes more sense.
Yeah, but some people are like, it's G Cucks, and that's fine. It's like, all right. So, yeah, and then so the big thing about this announcement, and I know there's not fucking RPGs, but it's a big moment.
Anyone who's listened to this podcast for any length of time knows that this is one of our regular scheduled tangents.
So the
Yes,
big
dear
thing about
listeners,
this,
you might think that you're listening to the Tetracast, but somehow we revived anime review.
that's right.
I was trying to explain to my friend this is the red alert.
Yeah, so Sunrise announced this new Gundam series, and the big thing is they're co-developing it, co-producing it with Studio Kara, and they're obviously best well known for the Evangelion remake rebuild films. And they have an all-star staff on it, including Hideaki Anno is part of the scripting, but he's not the overall director or direction. He's kind of more of a backseat writing role, not necessarily deciding like the direction of it, but a lot of people are very excited for the overall direction of this, including I think there's like the character artist. I don't remember. I think it's Take.
That's right.
Who's they were involved with Pokemon, so a lot of the designs of it, it's very reminiscent of Pokemon for the character.
I saw some memes where
Well,
they were like, I was born to be like a Pokemon trainer, but
Born to catch Pokemon, forced to pile Gundam.
But not
exactly.
But not just any Pokemon. Pokemon Sun and Moon, which is where they did the character like design overhaul.
Yeah.
And then the director Kazuya Tsurumaki, who is Fooly Cooly and Die Buster, and of course Hideaki Anno, like you said. So Hideaki. So a lot of really neat talent on this project.
Yeah, and so then the Italian synopsis leak thing is apparently based on like what the Italian website leaked is there's like an alternate universal century where, if people remember the original Gundam, the very beginning of that show was Char trying to steal the Gundam and was unsuccessful, which spawned off a whole lot of events where Amuro took the Gundam itself instead.
Biggest life is miserable.
So now in this new Gundam series, apparently it's a timeline where Char was successful in stealing the Gundam, and Zeon won the 1-year war in it, which is really interesting because this is not the first time this has happened. There's a whole game series called Giran's Greed, strategy.
That's an
series.
RPG, by the way.
Yeah, it's not really. It's more a strategy game, but yes. Where it takes that concept as well. Giran's Greed is like, hey, what if Zeon, won the 1-year war, and so it's like a lot of people who played that series like, oh, that's really funny. That's like they're kind of dipping into this premise again. And now instead of like like the main focus of this was like is illegal underground arena fights with Gundams. So it's like, all right, I guess. So it's interesting. It's very exciting. It's very fresh. I mean, a lot of people are very we're excited in the same way that when Witch from Mercury was announced as well.
I think Witcher Mercury was great, but thing is, like, when I watched it, it's like a lot of people can't really get into it. They're like old school Gundam fans, like, oh, I wanted like war and war crimes and all this kind of crap.
And that
But
eventually did happen, but then like
it does happen, but it's like a school arc, and people are like, what is this? Now I get Dragon's Den or Shark Tank in a Gundam show. You're like, what is going on? You
yeah,
know?
it's very slow burn. I'd say like a lot of build up, and I actually like. I actually do enjoy Witch Mercury. I think it's quite good for most of it. I think like the last third of it is
The last third of it, it's like just
very rushed.
wrap it up,
Yeah.
guys.
What I've heard
Exactly.
is it really suffered from being a like 2-core show. It should have had like more time to breathe.
Absolutely, yeah. So, but we'll
Yeah,
see
the
how this
first
one
war
goes.
was paced really well, and then the second one is just like we have to both escalate this to a universal conflict and then resolve it in 12 episodes. And
Yeah,
and introduced all the like the Earth faction and all that. It just did doubled the speed of the show and kind of lost the plot a little bit. It wasn't bad. It was just rushed.
yeah. But I think like overall, I'm always excited like when Gundam does this when they like when overall the Gundam series just kind of does like really goes in a well they've always gone in a really weird direction, but they just go in like really overtly weird directions and tries like totally something fresh and new and just Gundam is really good at um presenting something that you didn't think you'd want, I guess, is the best way I could put it. It's like, oh, I didn't even imagine that like Gundam could like do this, and then it does it. It's like,
That's
oh,
like
okay,
G Gundam, It presented a
yeah,
stupid concept, but it's like then you love it. Right?
yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, there's a wrestling ring around the planet of Earth. It's like, okay, cool, that's awesome. Uh, so yeah, that's it. That's our podcast. We just want to put on this podcast to announce the new Gundam. That's it.
Thanks for listening. But yeah, we're recording this in the first week of December. So obviously for our site, December is treated as kind of quote 2025, but we still have a couple major releases that we're going to be talking about. Two of them this week. We're going to be talking about Path of Exile 2, and then of course the big console and PC release of Fantasian Neo Dimension. And I know when Adam put up the release schedule for December, it was like the month of early access because of course Path of Exile 2 headlines that, but there was like 4 or 5 early access titles releasing uh this month. So I forget what those were, but there was a lot of them, and Adam had listed them on the site. But we're going to be focusing on Path of Exile 2. I know, Josh, you played the Q rodeo last 2 days, and just, with
It was
yeah, I guess just kind of detail it for us because as just someone on the fringe, I saw people posting like queue lengths and you know issues with connections, but a lot of people got in and was able to put several hours into the early access, so they were able to play it successfully. So just what was your experience with early access period of Path of Exile 2?
Yeah, so it's not as chaotic as like at that definitely for the first like 3 hours it was, but it's interesting and funny because in pre-release interviews, the main spokesperson from Grinding Gear Games on this, I believe I don't know if he's a director or producer exactly, but Jonathan Rogers, anticipated and Grinding Gears Games anticipated that, like, this wouldn't go this early access period for Path of Exile 2 wouldn't surpass over 1 million because it's kind of like paid early access. When the full game releases, it'll still be free to play, like the first Path of Exile. But to get into this early access period, you either had to fork up $30, and to be clear, when you pay $30 to get into early access, they still kind of quote unquote refund you in $30 worth of like microtransaction points that you can use on cosmetics or stash tabs. Nothing in the microtransactions like in Path of Exile 1 directly affects gameplay. It's usually just cosmetics and additional stash tabs, and that's it. Um, so even if you've paid the $30, you're still getting something in return with the microtransaction points and choose how to spend them. Or you can get a key. Whether like someone who paid an absurd amount of money to get into the early to get into the early access because they're a big Path of Exile 1 fan, or they really like want to support Grinding Gear Games. You might know someone, or some streams are doing giveaways, some sites are doing key giveaways. But those are like the two primary ways you get into the early access beta. If you're just like a complete newcomer, if you're like an old school veteran Path of Exile 1 player that like already forked up a certain amount, there's like a legacy threshold where like they'll just give you early access right away because as a thank you for supporting us along the way type of deal. So a friend of mine, gave me a key, and I decided to try it out. And as day one early launches go for like these sorts of like games as a service, especially action RPGs, like I remember flashbacks to like Diablo 3 launch day, for example, with Error 37. It's like who knows what the situation is going to be like, right? And Jonathan Rogers mentioned in a prior interview that like there's no we really don't think this will surpass 1 million, but we've allowed capacity for a max around 1 million, but we really don't think it'll surpass it. Lo and behold, their social media was like, we've surpassed over 1 million keys redeemed. And Jonathan Rogers was like, we're gonna try our best to make sure that like everything's working, the servers are working. Try to get there, but just be aware there might be login queues, server troubles, throughout the weekend, launch day, etc. Because like they just really didn't anticipate that for the most part, a paid early access would do so well, especially for a sequel to Path of Exile 1, which Path of Exile 1 definitely has a loyal fan base and it has only like been growing throughout the years, but never to this extent. And now that since Path of Exile 2 has gotten so much positive coverage throughout the last several years, really, but especially ramped up the last several months, he just didn't anticipate it. So before the supposed servers, like the supposed launch time for this was 11 a.m. Pacific on December 6th. This was after the delay that we posted up that they delayed it from the November because they wanted to make sure everything was working. So it went up, and they already put on their social media that like, hey, it'll be delayed just a bit because we're expanding the database and to make sure that there's minimal issues with this, that we'll have to push it back a little. So that doesn't stop people from booting up the client, whether you're on Steam or the standalone client or you're on console, from just mashing login at the home menu. Like me and my friends were, we sure were mashing X or whatever a lot, just in case, because it's one of those things that like they usually do a good job doing handling login queues, but you always want to be as early in line as possible, just in case it gets really bad. So some time went by yesterday, about like 3 hours. It wasn't really until like 2 p.m. Pacific that the servers went live and stable, because they had it went live earlier than that, but then there was another issue where in expanding the database, they had an issue of like there was going to be duplicate character IDs, and that was going to be really, really bad if they let that issue persist. So they have to take it down again. Finally brought back up at around 2 p.m. And for the most part, there was a login queue, but they were letting in people at a pretty fast pace. And so after it finally went up, like there's been really minimal issues. Like even now, like it's the weekend, it's gonna be its most busiest this first weekend. The servers are stable. I played a little bit this morning, and there was no login queue. So for the most part of this month, like who knows, something can blow up, but who knows on their back end. But right now, it seems like the emergency procedures that they did to ensure a more stable overall experience this first weekend, seems to be paying off. I'd rather take that like slight delay instead of like persistent issues over the weekend. So I think
Yeah,
that was
it sounds like they were able to sort everything within. Let me just be conservative here. 24 hours. That's not that bad in the grand scheme of things.
yeah, because we got through this rodeo time and time again, Brian. Especially like with action RPG launches. It's not now, but like even like back then with like Diablo 3, for example.
Yep.
That issue persisted for quite a while when that launched. So so I started with a ranger in this game. and so it's the bow and arrow class, archer class, and I first started out on WASD, and then I switched to controller eventually. But either way is fine. Like I think the hardest control scheme is probably the traditional point and click, because this game has like dodge rolls and you can move and shoot. If you're like a range class, which is like a big advantage for a range class. Not to say that like melee is unviable, not viable. It definitely is, but it takes a little bit more ramp up for that. Um, and it's been really, really, really fun. Like I am a complete Path of Exile newcomer, but I've had a handful of friends over the years who have been played Path of Exile 1 for about a decade and are very, very into the Path of Exile scene. They like whenever a new league starts, they make new characters. They play all the whole campaign and throughout the whole league end game. They're very, very knowledgeable in Path of Exile, and I trust them with anything Path of Exile related. In terms of like if I need like a few tips or what to expect, or like just kind of or just kind of getting to the right like mindset, because like this game is very different in some ways than other action RPGs on the market. And one of those ways is the way that skills work in Path of Exile 2. In Path of Exile 2, when you level up, it's not necessarily that like when you reach level 5 you'll get this skill, and when you reach level 10 you get this skill. It's not as linear as that. Instead, when you beat like certain bosses or certain unique enemies, they'll drop something called an uncut skill gem. And this skill gem could be, at the moment, like levels 1 through 4 for me. But obviously, when you start out, it's going to be like usually level 1. Um, when you use that skill gem, you have this skill interface window that pops up, and you can choose like 1 out of 3 skills generally, depending on the weapon that you have. So like I have a bow, and I have like one out of 3 skills. One of them is like a lightning arrow. One of them is a poison shot, um, etc. And it's completely your choice what you want to use that uncut skill gen on. So let's say I choose lightning arrow, then that means you gain a lightning arrow level 1 skill gem, and you use that to socket you socket that in to like your skill slots, and that's how you actually gain that skill. So it's not like level 5 you gain lightning arrow. It's like, oh, uncut skill gem drop, and then it's your choice what 1 out of 3 skills you want to like invest in next on that. And it's dependent on weapon too, and your class doesn't lock you out of a weapon. So let's say I wanted a ranger, but I wanted to this ranger to use a quarterstaff. The only thing that I would need to meet is like, say like the strength or dexterity or intelligence requirements to wield a weapon. But as long as you wield that weapon, you're free to like use that skill gem to learn a weapon for a staff instead, because you have a staff. So you can have a ranger who's using a staff as a weapon and using staff skills. So your class doesn't necessarily dictate like your entire play style, pretty much, because there is some like multi-classing things that you can experiment with. But since I'm a newcomer, I'm like, okay, I don't want to dip into that yet. I want to expand my understanding of that game, of this game first. I want to get my fundamental, understanding down before I start branching out into other things. And I think that's kind of the healthy mindset to learn. Not, Path of Exile in general is there's a lot of systems, but if you take it one step at a time and kind of learn at your own pace, then it's kind of it's much more easier to understand once you just start branching out just a little bit, but first getting your base understanding established first. So uh, so I have this lightning arrow, for example, and let's say I get an uncut skill gem level 4, for example. When you use that uncut skill gem level 4, you can use that to like say that same skill to level it up instantly from like level 1 to level 4, or you can use it like on another skill to learn that new skill, and then automatically level it up to level 4 as well. There's no like inching progression to like the certain level. It's more like, hey, you got that skill gem level, you can instantly learn a new skill and raise it up to like the max level that that skill gem encapsulates. So it's nothing like, oh, I'm just making minute enhancements to like a one skill. You can actually just get like an arsenal of skills off the bat once you start earning those. So those are like the
I have a
ways.
question.
Yeah.
The gems that you get, are they like just, you say drops, are they kind of like random, or are there certain drops that are found in certain places? Like if I was looking for a certain gem, can I do that, or is it just kind of luck of the draw?
So the uncut skill gem is completely like it's what you can turn it into whatever you want. So once you get it, you can when you right click it, you can use it on whatever skill you want.
Oh,
And
okay,
then
so it's not for a
yeah,
certain type of skill. Okay.
no. You can
So
use
it's,
it
it's
on
almost
whatever
like
you
a
want.
currency then, kind of in a way.
Almost. Yeah. And it's semi-random in the sense that like mini bosses that you encounter in a zone, I believe will always drop one on the first time you beat it. And I think there's like certain uniques. I don't know. I don't know if normal mobs can drop it. I don't really know about. I don't think so. But but definitely like if you beat like a boss for the first time, it'll most certainly drop it. I think that's like a fixed drop for them. Um, and I'm sure there's like something behind the scenes, like maybe you go into a new zone and might be slightly higher level than you, so maybe mobs might be more susceptible or more have a better chance to like drop one to kind of get you up to speed instantly. So I'm not exactly sure on the math on that, but you earn them enough like you don't ever feel like you're behind in terms of like, oh no, I haven't what hasn't dropped for me in a while. I've never felt like that in terms of like, oh no, I feel like all my skills are underpowered because one of these hasn't dropped for me. I haven't felt that at all. Um, and then what makes this even more complex on this end of the skills is there are these other things called support gems. And support gems are, think of them as modifiers to your skills. So let's say I get a support gem, and like the skill gems, when you right click it, there's another interface that pops up, and it's not too overwhelming because they've grinding gear games has basically give you like a recommended support gems per skill, so you don't feel overwhelmed. So let's say I want to use the support gem on my lightning arrow to put a modification on it, and let's say like two of the support gems are chance to poison on hit and spread shot. So there'll be like more projectiles. Like it'll add maybe 3 projectiles on whenever I cast lightning arrow. But the downside is like it takes just a slightly more wind up to fire off the skill, and it does a little bit less damage in as a trade off of more projectiles. Um, for instance. So you get the quick shot support gem, and you can equip it on the lightning arrow if you want, but you can also just freely equip it to whatever other skills that you have as well. So let's say I have a normal bow shot, I can just like transfer that spread shot over to my bow shot, and then that skill or normal attack has the spread shot multiplier now, or I could put it on other skills like my let's say my poison arrow. I can make that a multi shot instead as well. And the simplified interface, you can turn that off. You can just say you can put all gems. You can make it show all gems, all support gems, and it'll give you like a fucking big ass page of like at least 40 or so. It's easily more than 40, but at least 40 of support gems, which are just modifiers um, that you can put on your skills, and it'll show you like check marks on like which, and when you hover over them, which skills you have that it can be applied to. So let's say there's a modifier that makes it so, let's see, what's a good one? That it'll pierce, for example. And let's say, even though pierce wasn't on the recommended list for lightning arrow, I could still put that on if I wanted to. I could just like get that support gem and put it on there, and as long as the green check mark that says it's okay to use, then you can easily just put it on there, and now your lightning arrow will pierce. And right now, I haven't been able to expand my amount of support gems, but the base amount of support gems you can put on a skill is 2. So let's say I put spread shot and pierce on my lightning arrow, it'll have those properties. It'll have multiple projectiles that can pierce. And that's kind of how support gems work with skills, where like each skill has at least 2 support gems. You can put modifiers on them, and those modifiers will actually be represented and work in tandem with your skills. So just on the skill front alone, it's already pretty complex, especially with how when you start thinking about like synergies and stuff like that. Let's say that since I have my lightning arrow that has multi projectile and pierces, that means that it can inflict, like, it can shock enemies, AOE mobs pretty easily. So now you can start thinking about like, oh, are there other modifiers that I can use on other skills to enhance that shock damage? Because there might be a support gem that I can slot into a skill that will do enhanced damage to shocked enemies. So obviously, it'll be one of those skill combos where like, okay, I'm gonna fire off lightning arrow, then I'm gonna use this skill because now this mob of enemies is shocked. So now I'll deal bonus damage if I use fire off this skill because I have shocked so many enemies at once. That's a very, very, very basic example. Even though it's like a lengthy sort of explanation, it's sort of that mindset of like, okay, you start thinking about organically as you learn the game step by step of like certain chemistries and certain ways that like things can work in tandem with one another. And then one of the big filters, I guess, in the first Path of Exile, is when newcomers install that game for the first time. They open up the skill tree, and it's the infamous Path of Exile skill tree where like you're like, holy god, this skill tree is ginormous. I don't know where to go. I'm uninstalling this game. It's way too much.
When you slip into another dimension,
yeah,
skill tree.
Exactly. So in Path of Exile 2, they didn't give up that skill tree. In fact, I think it might be even bigger. But it's one of those things that like it doesn't feel overwhelming once you start like looking, like just investing in a node and then like start going down a path, because you start learning how to read the skill tree if you just think about like, I only want to focus on the big nodes, and those big nodes are called notables, and those notables can be skills like, for example, there'll be like a notable that gives me plus 3% movement speed, and then increases the effects of my quiver, whatever effects there are, whether it's like chance to crit or bonus physical damage, bonus elemental damage. It'll increase the bonus effects of my quiver by 30%. So I'm like, oh, that's a really good like skill node to have. So the only thing I'm worrying about is like how I'm gonna path there, right? So I take down a node and I just like kind of make my way pip by pip, node by node, do that notable. All the other nodes there will benefit me, whether it's like +5 to like an attribute of my choice, or maybe it's like more projectile speed or more projectile damage. But every single node in that path there will benefit me in some way. You don't have to really worry about that. The only thing you're worried about is like, what big node do I want next? And then you start thinking about, okay, I'm like, okay, which route do I want to go down to get to that big node? And like, just focus on like one linear pathway of that skill tree, and then you'll be fine. The reason that it's so big and it allows you to see the rest is because it's allowing for very, if you have like a certain playstyle that you want to do. Let's say you want to do a melee ranger, then that means you can go start specking down like a certain pathway in that skill tree and want to increase melee damage. If you want like a unconventional build of like a melee ranger that that uses like maybe hammers or maces instead of like a bow, for example. So it's one of those things like you don't have to do that. There's no way, like you don't really have to do that, but if you can, if you want, So it's not like every other part of the skill tree is like locked out of you, and that's why they make it so you can see the whole skill tree, is so you can like path your way towards those nodes and not feel locked out of like other ways to build your character. So it's not like, to me, like the skill tree doesn't feel overwhelming. Like they actually do a really good smart thing, is like when you first open up the skill tree for the first time, it's zoomed in and only shows like your part of like your base classes, like starting nodes. So you don't see the whole skill tree at once. You just see, you can zoom out anytime you want, but it's zoomed into like your portion of the your class's tree at first. So you don't feel like oh my god. So it's not really like that crazy. It's just one of those things like you have to think you have to start thinking about like what will benefit me. You might not have like a certain like build in mind, and that's fine. But they're obviously just gonna be like universal basic things that'll benefit you. Like, hey, I want to use a bow and arrow. I'm gonna start pathing to nodes that'll increase my damage, increase my benefits for using a bow and quiver, obviously. And you can just hover over anything on that, and you start thinking about like how do I want to get any much. Um,
So
and
what if
for
you like are start your like you have an idea in mind. Let's keep with your example, and you're like,
Mhm.
I want to be a ranger that use maces, and you figure out like a route, and you're like, okay, let me decide on this path. I get a bunch of the way you described them almost seemed like passives that will support me, and then I have this larger node at the end that's kind of like my destination
yeah.
that I don't know for sure yet that I think will really support the idea I have in my head for a build. I guess the idea of build craft is at the center of this game. I've heard people
Yeah.
compare it to like obviously not like Diablo 4, but Diablo 3 might have been a little bit better. I've heard some people compare it to Guild Wars, specifically 1 had
Mhm.
a similar idea where your class didn't dictate what weapons you could use. But then you say, okay, I don't like the flavor of this. I tried it. Let me try going back to a bow. Like, what
Yeah.
are like respec options or loadout options? I guess in both ways.
They've made it really easy to respec now. Like I remember, like people have talked about like the Path of Exile 1, where like respecing was challenging. Like I don't know exactly what systems were in place. But eventually the one of the latest leagues, like I think it's like Path of Kalgur, I believe. They made it so you can respec any like node on that skill tree for gold. So in Path of Exile 2, they made it pretty easy to respec, unlike in Path of Exile 1. I remember when friends were talking about Path of Exile 1, I don't know the exact systems, but they made respecing a little bit more convoluted or challenging in that compared to Path of Exile 2. And one of Path of Exile 1's latest leagues, I think it's called Path of Kalgur, they made it so you could respec your passive tree nodes with gold. So you could kind of like undo any of like the passive skill tree nodes that you've invested in just with gold. So that system is like the baseline of Path of Exile 2, where let's say you're not feeling like the melee ranger build and you want to go down bow instead of maces. You can just pay gold to respect your passive skill tree nodes, which is a big change between those two games. And unlike Path of Exile 1, Path of Exile 1, honestly, like from talking with friends and how they kind of talked about like where the game evolved over the years, there was definitely ways you could brick your character in ways that like it'd be really hard to like fix them, because they're like there'd be later game difficulty ramps that like if your character wasn't built a certain way, it'd be really hard to kind of surpass like that difficulty ramp. um so like for example, there'll be bosses like later in Path of Exile 1 that like could just like easily one shot you, and you're like, what am I doing wrong with my build? And like one of the more significant Path of Exile 1 traps is in its passive skill tree. You have to really be thinking about survivability in terms of like getting life nodes and paying attention really a lot to like your resistances and just your general defense overall. Like you have to kind of go out of your way in the skill tree to kind of get those nodes. And if you didn't get those nodes, survivability would be definitely more challenging. So you really have to think about pathing to like out of the way life nodes in Path of Exile 1. While in Path of Exile 2, um, it's very rare to have a life node in Path of Exile 2 compared to Path of Exile 1. So survivability comes down more to like when you're leveling up and like the gear that you get along the way, less so about um, like pathing to it on the skill tree. There are like definitely some ones like in ascendancies that give you some life nodes for because of that how that class works. Let's say like a melee like advanced class ascendancy might get like a big life node because it's built for like tanking damage and like bringing the fight up close to enemies, and that's why it has that. Um, so it's a lot more inviting in that sense of like there's not really like a permanently bricked way to build your character in Path of Exile 2. While in some cases in Path of Exile 1, you could definitely get there and not be able to like adjust course on the difficulty ramp of that game. From what I understand, from speaking to friends and watching people who are way more well versed in Path of Exile 1 on that end. So I think Path of Exile 2, just as a complete Path of Exile 1 Path of Exile newcomer in general, like it's one of those things like it feels really really engaging. It feels fresh to me, but it feels like I'm not being overwhelmed by systems. It does a really really great job pacing out and teaching you and doling out its systems. Like even what I'm saying like sounds complex when you actually start playing it. It feels way more organic and natural to learn these systems along the way. And it's not an easy game either. It's like baseline. It's like kind of difficult. There's definitely some bosses that like a lot of people are they're filters, and it's compared to Path of Exile 1, it's a slower, more heavier game. Mobs, a tactic in Path of Exile 1 was rounding up like lots and lots of mobs around the zone and then killing them all out in like one big AoE burst. So like you're just kind of like chaining mobs all together to kind of kill them all in one blast. In Path of Exile 2, you can't do that. Like every time you encounter like a mob, especially when you're in the same level as them, they're pretty threatening. Things will, when you get hit, it'll hurt. So you kind of have to treat each encounter as you have to respect it. It's not something that you can round up and kill all in one blast. If there's too many enemies up on you, you will die and you'll die fast. So you really have to think about how you're pathing through zones to get to the next place that you need to go. Um, so it's definitely more methodical. And they added a dodge roll in this game, and that's big for mobility as well, and just like in general, just like kind of like keeping the threat level at bay and keeping yourself mobile and not too in place for too long. And like each like zone, like the maps that you go to are like really large. I've watched my friends play Path of Exile 1 many times, and the maps in 2 are considerably like larger um in general to Path of Exile 1. So it'll take you some time to kind of like find where you need to go to next, because you're uncovering the map and the map is it's not a stagnant static map. Like it'll every time you zone into it, it'll be like sort of random, like semi randomly generated. Like there'll be still like familiar assets of like, hey, this mini boss in it will always like spawn after you go into this house, but that house on that map is like could be anywhere on that map. Um, and that's kind of the cool thing about Path of Exile 2 is like within each map, there's usually like 1 through 2 like mini optional bosses, they're all unique, and some have like you know unique boss mechanics. So like say one has like an encounter that you do, and you beat it up, and then it starts running off, and then it starts like banging on a gate, and then when you catch up to it, you're like enclosed in this really small arena space with it, and then after that, it starts running away again into another bit like enclosed arena space, but it like has a bell this time, like it ripped out a giant bell, and it's not now it uses that bell as a weapon, so it has new moves that you have to think about in that small zone um, as well. And I think that's one of the big things also in Path of Exile 2 compared to Path of Exile 1. Especially Path of Exile 1 veterans are kind of almost struggling a little bit in terms of like how boss design works in this game because bosses aren't something that like you could really breeze through. They have like all very distinct multi-phase mechanics. There's like going to be like AoE markers on the ground, tells, like big attacks that like if you get hit by them, you might get almost like one shot by them. Um, and like they're like bosses are very much like an event in this game, and you have to really respect bosses. It's not something that you can easily breeze through. You have to respect and learn their mechanics in this initial playthrough. While in Path of Exile 1, it seems like it's a solved problem in Path of Exile 1. So it's it's really 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 cool. Uh, I've been enjoying it a lot. I think there is one thing that's kind of odd, but it makes sense in in a vacuum where I know, Adam, that like during bosses, something that you don't like is ads in bosses, like constant spawning of ads and bosses.
Yeah, I'm not really a big fan of
Yeah.
the Mook squad design.
Yeah. So in many of the boss encounters in Path of Exile 2, there are spawning ads, but it's for resource generation because in this game you have one HP flask and one mana flask. Unlike in Path of Exile 1, you had like several of those that you had to piano through. In this one, you only have one HP flask and one mana flask, and they have charges. And you can use them about like 6 to 7 times before they fully deplete. So in order to gain back HP and mana flask, you have to kill stuff, and you'll generally gain more charges depending on the rarity of the mob. So that's why there are ads. A lot of boss encounters have ads, is because it's less to overwhelm you with enemies, and more so to give you a chance to replenish your resources, just in case you might only have like maybe one HP flask left, and there's still a lot of the fight left. It's like, oh man, I need something to charge up my HP flask, and then that's why they have ads in it. So it's one of those mechanics like I don't know how I feel about that. It's kind of like a weird sort of thing that I understand the reason why they do it, and I don't know if it's like a perfect solution, and might be something that might very well change because the change to HP, how flasks work in this game was like a very last minute change by the developers, as they even admitted to it. So it's one of those. It's like it's aside from that, like in general, it's very much it's an early access game, but just because it's early access doesn't mean it's like completely devoid of content. Like
Probably too much content.
the campaign alone is like maybe 35 hours, like maybe minimum, and then like there's the whole end game that's like that you can do like spend hundreds of hours on because it's like a very expansive end game and something that a lot of Path of Exile 1 newcomers really value. So how they did this, I think I've mentioned this before. In this early access, Acts 1 through 3 of the main campaign are available. And in the full game, they'll add Acts 4 through 6, but those aren't done yet. So what they do is you do Acts 1 through 3, and then you kind of go through a new game plus of Acts 1 through 3 again, but a higher difficulty and obviously better rarity equipment and stuff. And then after you do that new game plus, then you get to the end game of that. So it's a pretty interesting, smart way to do it. So they're able to let people experience the end game and really pour time into the end game without having to sacrifice another thing. Another sacrifice they could have made is like just do acts 1 through 6 or only a certain amount of acts with like no end game, and that would feel shitty, for people. So I think they found a nice compromise on that, and I'll be interested to see how that all shakes out when I get there. I've only reached Act 2 so far, which is already like 6 to 7 hours in. Um, and yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that it's hard to convey like how much I really like it in words alone. It's one of those like you gotta play this. If you like action RPGs and you like the Diablo style of like action RPGs, definitely give this a shot because this feels like a breath of fresh air and really, really like engaging. It's one of those things that like just stuck you in, and I'm not gonna say it's for everyone, but it's definitely one of those things like I think about it constantly now. I wonder I as soon as this episode is up, I'm gonna be logging back into Path of Exile too. It's just a blast to play. Everything feels so satisfying. Like it's incredible. I'm this once
Are you having theory crafting, build crafting dreams?
I might get there. Not yet. I have like a sort of lightning arrow focused build right now on my ranger. Like it does a lot of like um lightning element stuff, but freeze is also really good in this game. So I might start either pivoting or multi-elementing into cold damage as well. I'm thinking about it already. I don't know. I don't know. Like one of what the right before this podcast started, I picked up a skill gem and invested into a skill that fires off like frost missiles, and I'm like, oh man, that sounds so cool. How am I gonna work that into my skill rotation, or do I have to change everything up? And maybe it'll be better. I don't know. And then I also have like in my stash I have like a bow that has like 2 sockets in it that like I want to use, but it's overall worse than my current bow. So I'm waiting for an item to like up the rarity of that bow from from magic item to a rare item. And, you know that I could go into all that, but it's gonna be too much already of like how you can increase the rarity of your items, increase my add on more modifiers to it, etc., etc. It's just it's a lot, but it's a lot of fun. So it's if you're interested at all, you could either wait like sometime next year and just play the game for free. This is going to be a totally free to play game, a full release like the first game, or you can pay up $30 and try out early access. I think it's really like worth it, like for sure. No questions. I think but obviously it's still some bugs around the edges. Like I already had like one crash because I pulled up the quest list on the map with on like the whole world map with my controller and like scrolling through those quests. There was something about that the game really didn't like and fucking crashed crashed the game. And it's what, but that's early access. And they'll iron it out. It'll get better.
And not only early access, but early access when they're getting a lot more server or network activity than they were anticipating.
Yeah.
But yeah, good to always see an early access title that's getting tons of support and has like 30 to 40 if you keep going through the end game, hundreds of hours that you can already dive into. And just the idea of having a game where the build craft is kind of as front and center as they've put in early for Path of Exile 2, just is kind of it puts it in a little bit more of a unique space compared to like Last Epoch or Diablo, more recent entries. Not that they don't have that, but it seems like they don't put the emphasis or the focus on it
Yeah,
in
it's
terms of
definitely not
player
as
freedom.
robust as this. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, of course, we'll keep tabs on Josh's time and Path of Exile 2 over the next year, I presume. We'll
Oh,
probably
wait.
touch in from time to time.
I think I'm gonna be playing this for quite a while.
The other big December, or at least early December release we want to talk about is, I teed it up at the start of the podcast, Fantasian, Neo Dimension. If you are a long-time listener of this podcast, we have already kind of talked about Fantasian at length in multiple contexts. Not to bury the lead, we gave it our Game of the Year in 2021 when it was an Apple Arcade exclusive and released in 2 parts. And I played it on an iPhone. I think the 3 of you played it on
Apple TV
Apple
4K.
TVs.
Yeah.
Chow, did you play Fantasian when it
I
was
bought
available?
it, but I haven't played it.
But of course, Fantasian Neo Dimension, we had the Steam DB release like a year ago. It released on Steam under the new title. It has the added voice acting. It has the Final Fantasy music for some reason. But it's the same game, but made more generally available on console and on PC. And I know that Adam has played through Neo Dimension. I don't know if anyone else here has played through Neo Dimension because
I
it's the
mean, I
same
reviewed
game.
it. Yeah.
Oh, you did do that, right? Sorry, I forgot about
Yeah.
that.
Though
So
to be
Adam and
fair,
James,
I didn't do a full replay because that
Were there
game's
some
long.
crashes around near the end of the game or something like that? But I think
Apparently
for
on like
IRA.
PS5 there were some issues, but like neither like Adam or I had any issues on PC, so
Yeah, I played through the game twice, and the Neo Dimension twice, and yeah, no issues.
So Adam, you put a lot of time into Neo Dimension over the last couple of weeks. I think we kind of teased it that you were working on something, and that's what you were working on. So obviously, you played through the mobile version. You played through Neo Dimension. Just remind us like what Neo Dimension is compared to the base game. I don't know if base game is the right term here. The original release.
I actually did have someone ask me, like, is this a sequel? Because not everyone's always like pays super attention to all these games like we do. And no, it's not a sequel. It's not a spin-off. It's the same game as the Apple Arcade game. The differences are voice acting. It's not split into 2 parts anymore. There's a new normal difficulty mode, and obviously like some console-based like performance toggles and specifications and whatnot. I'm trying to think if there's really anything else like they added. There's no new content. There's no new story. There's no new epilogue or anything like that. So it's basically the same game, just the console version. So
Hey, at least the best feature in the Steam Deck is that it can show your battery.
That's pretty
yeah,
good.
which is really interesting that that's a thing, but
I think the main thing to know about this game, if you're going into it for the first time, it's worth knowing the context that it was originally released in 2 parts, for a couple of reasons. I have seen some people like curious about, like, for example, the skill tree gets unlocked 15 hours in, and that is a little bit maybe strange on its face, like in a vacuum. Like, that's weird. It takes that long to get to the skill tree, but the way the original game was formatted, basically the first part of the game didn't have the skill tree until the very end. It was sort of like a teaser of things to come for part 2. So now that the parts are kind of put together, it does seem on its face a little bit weird that it takes so long to get there, but it's just kind of the way the game was structured, being like part 1 kind of being like your introduction to the characters, to the places, to the world, and you pretty much visit not every dungeon, but most of the world in part 1, and then you kind of revisit it all in part 2.
And then you get like extended like areas like in the forest,
Yes,
or like in the
and there's more dungeons. There's Shangri-La, and then the Bacteria infestation, and all these different places. But yeah, in the original game, part 1, part 2, part 2 basically is like unlocking the skill tree. Now you can go to all these places. Now you can swap your party, and now you can do all these things with your party build. I mean, your characters are not flexible. Your characters are pretty rigid. There's some flexibility in what you can do with the skill tree, but that skill tree doesn't unlock until part 2. And then also, we talked about this several times. The first part of the game is very classic PlayStation 1 era Final Fantasy. It's got a similar sort of tone to it, similar sort of look. It kind of reminds me of like Final Fantasy VIII. It almost looks like a pre-rendered background, but remember, they're not pre-rendered. They are literal live photographs of dioramas that are used as the backdrop to the game. I actually saw a Blue Sky post, a skate, go kind of viral because basically they're saying, did you know this game uses dioramas? And there's a lot of people saying that they had like no idea this game has dioramas, which I guess that's fair because it feels like Square Enix really hasn't emphasized that for the new version. They did a lot for the original version, basically emphasizing, this game uses real life created dioramas that you can look at, that you can pick up, that you can smell. They're there. I mean, we can't smell them.
They put up a handful of like YouTube videos that like went throughout the creation process of it. I was like, that's like the best part about it. I mean, I love it. Like
even if you have no interest in Fantasian, if you watch, maybe we can link it in the site post, I'm not sure, but just the Fantasian making of these dioramas, how large they are, how intricate they are, all the tiny little props and furniture and pieces, it's super impressive.
One of my major grievances, like with this Neo Dimension, I think I mentioned it before, was like I wish it was like a diorama viewer, just seeing the dioramas for themselves, like super up close in the game, like a gallery of sorts. Because like, I picked this up as well, and like the first thing that like really blew me was like, man, these diorama, the visual fidelity of those dioramas are so fucking crisp compared to the Apple version. It's so good. Yeah.
Now back to my original point. Part 2 is the second part of the game. It's probably the simplest comparison to make is Final Fantasy VI World of Ruin, where you lose your party. You can basically travel the whole world at this point. And your first goal is basically to find everyone again. And not only that, but the game ratchets up in difficulty quite a bit, especially in the Apple Arcade original version of the game. This game is hard, and honestly, like very hard. There's a big focus on like boss battles and the challenges in terms of like using skills, buffs and debuffs and status elements and switching out characters at the right time with the right cadence and the right timing. And there wasn't a whole lot of margin for error. Some of those bosses, you kind of had to like almost be picture perfect, not quite, but almost like you really had to be very smart in what you do win. And in Fantasian, this is actually we talked about this when we gave this our game of the year. This is part of the design that we all think is pretty damn cool and also fairly rare in games like this. But I also think this can catch people off guard, and it has.
Yeah, I seen even like one of our co-writers here, like Scott. It's like, I don't see the appeal of this kind of game. You're like,
I'm sorry, Scott. He probably doesn't listen to this, but like he was talking about the boss difficulty getting hard, and he actually wasn't even out of part 1 yet. And I couldn't bring myself to tell him, like, you're not even at the point where it really gets hard yet. Sorry, Scott. It does get that last boss in part 1, the Chaos Worm, is a bit tricky, but it gets even trickier after that. But I do think that the second part of the game, I see a couple of reviews basically saying this game is like, if you miss classic Final Fantasy, you should pick this up. But I also kind of feel like the second part of the game, the design doesn't really feel like Final Fantasy to me anymore in terms of the bosses and the difficulty and the really high focus on like crunchy mechanics and like party setup. I think it's really cool, but I 100% can see where people who want like a more, classic Final Fantasy, and I hope I'm not insulting anyone when I say this, but Final Fantasy games are generally pretty easy. I mean, I know some of them have like challenging super bosses or optional quests or things like that, but for the most part, they're not difficult games. But Fantasian is not that. It can get pretty hard, and people can and will, or I should say will and have gotten frustrated at some of the design in that. So yeah, or filtered if you want to use modern vernacular.
I think a good way it would be like Final Fantasy IV on the DS. It's not like
Oh, yeah.
ultra hard, but it's pretty hard.
Yeah, it is.
And like a lot of those boss fights become like a puzzle, and they try to like throw you off guard compared to the Super Nintendo version. It's like, for example, you're fighting Bahamut in the original. You just cast Reflect on yourself, and he'll like kill himself with a flare. But in the DS version, he casts Reflect on himself. Then he used the flare on himself to kill you.
Yeah, that's
So you're
right. That's
like,
awesome.
what? Like,
This is going to be maybe a weird comparison, but in Final Fantasy 3, I think it's 3, there's a boss in that game, Garuda. And before you fight Garuda, you pick up the Dragoon class, or the Spear class. I'm trying to remember exactly how it works. But the way to beat that boss is to use that class and use the jump ability to basically dodge its attacks and deal damage. And my point is like, you don't have to do that, but you're going to have a much, much harder time if you don't. And I have seen people criticize, like, man, this Garuda boss is so damn hard. Why is this game so hard? But the thing is they weren't really approaching the boss properly or the way that the game intended. And the game kind of clues you in that this is what you're supposed to do. And I think Fantasian kind of feels like a significant expansion on that, where the various bosses in the second part of the game, a lot of them have a trick to it, where there are certain abilities or characters that are meant to be used to beat the boss. You don't necessarily have to, but you're going to make it harder for yourself if you don't realize that. And I do know there are some criticisms where people might say something like, oh, well, the boss only has one solution, and if you don't find it, you're screwed. I think that's maybe a little bit extreme, but you kind of have to be smart about what abilities you have, what your characters are capable of, and how to get around a certain mechanic. For example, there's a boss in Fantasian in the second half. It's in the lab area, the Hidden Valley, where there's these bosses, or it's a pair of bosses, it's two bosses, like a dual boss, and they cast basically barrier and heal on themselves a lot. Now, if you played Fantasian up to this point, this is fairly late in the game, you should already know how to like get around this. You could just try out damaging them and try to deal more damage faster than they can heal themselves, and I'm sure you can eventually win, but it's going to be a pain in the ass. Or if you use the analyze ability on the boss, you realize it'll tell you in that little box that shows up, they are 80% susceptible to curse. And curse prevents healing. And really, that's what the game is telling you. It's like, hey, dummy, use curse on this boss. It'll be a lot easier. You don't have to, but it'll be a lot easier. I use that example because it's a relatively simple example to like describe the sort of like, there are some intended solutions for bosses. Some of them are a little bit less straightforward maybe, but the bosses do have a bit of a puzzle element to them where there are certain solutions that are going to make it easier for yourselves if you find them.
It's
I
a
think
very detail-oriented type of game. I'll have to go for it, Chow.
I was gonna say, I think a closest thing that sounds close to me is in Grand Blue, the mobile game. There's this mode called the Pride of the Ascendants, and you basically fight like these ultra hard version of these bosses, and even gotcha elements will not save you from it. And everything's like a puzzle. Like one boss would be like you can only use your skill 9 times, and you got to figure out a way to kill him, and it gets harder every 25% or something like that. There's all these like cool mechanics with it, but they only released like 6 bosses. I think it's just more like for endgame players that wanted to like try something like difficult. And this sounds kind of like my jam, where it's like a puzzle, not, and you can't really brute force it because there's no way to grind in this game.
Yeah, not really.
No, because in the second half of the game, once you reach level 35, you stop gaining experience. Once you gain level 35, basically enemies that are lower level than you will more or less stop giving you experience. It starts scaling in a way like that. And it's very similar to Lost Odyssey, actually, in that regard, which is another Mistwalker game. By the way, it's kind of weird to think about that this is the first like console Mistwalker game in like 13 years or something like that. When was the last story?
Since Blue Dragon, is it?
No, I think Last Story was later. That was like 2011, 2010, something like that.
Yeah, it's a long time ago.
So like 13, 14 years.
I like Last Story.
I like it too.
It's been cool to see Creative Studio 3 because they did the Fantasian port, right? So they're calling out Fantasian on like their Final Fantasy 14 and 16 accounts. There was, I forget the name of the artist, but the artist did the Fantasian characters in the classic like 16-bit FF sprite style. And Fantasian is not Final Fantasy.
They're also currently like advertising the port on the FF14 launcher. So
also, there was a video on YouTube for Square Enix Asia that was literally just Sakaguchi basically introducing the game to specifically the Asian audience as producer of the game. And I don't know why, but it kind of felt like warm and fuzzy just to kind of see like Sakaguchi in the modern like YouTube era. Just like we see like these sorts of, producer messages all the time now from various developers, but especially in Japanese, where they just have like a quick video that just kind of, hi, I'm producer so-and-so, this is my game, please enjoy it sort of thing. And it was just kind of neat to see like one of those, but it was Sakaguchi of all people explaining like in one of those like letters from the producer sort of messages. It just kind of feels like from a bygone era almost, or a blast from the past or whatever. In terms of Neo Dimension, they added voice acting. I played in English. I actually think the English voice acting is pretty damn solid. I kind of expected it to be kind of half-assed maybe. Maybe not a big budget game, but it's pretty good. Go ahead.
I feel like with Square Enix dubs in particular, it's kind of a coin flip, whether it's really, really good or really kind of not so good. And I'm glad that Fantasian is very good.
The studio that did this was Skylark Studios, with which Square Enix has used a lot. I think that's basically the same studios that does, like, for example, Kingdom Hearts. And I think Crisis Core Final Fantasy remake. I was looking up. They do a bunch of Square Enix stuff. They don't do like the big games, but a lot of the other games. But yeah, I think the voice acting is pretty solid. Okay, Trials of Mana was that game's voice acting is kind of like confusingly bad. Like, how is this even possible?
That's the first one I was like, okay, I'm switching to Japanese. I'm sorry, guys. I tried giving this a chance. I could.
I remember looking up the studio and the director that did that one, and they had not done a lot. They must have been like a new studio or someone that Square Enix had not worked with anyway. Anyways, I think the voice acting is pretty damn solid. I really like Zinniker, actually. He's the boat captain guy, kind of an old grizzled.
I love how every single one of his like combat barks is like basically nautical themed.
Yeah,
is he the Sid of Fantasian?
Yeah, pretty much. And then I also think actually probably the biggest advantage to the voice acting is the memory scenes. Those are like the storybook scenes where it's basically like, a text with some images, sort of near-ish or Lost Odyssey-ish sorts of memory scenes. It's probably not as good as either of those, frankly, but I still think the voice acting, like I think they're called the storytellers that tell those stories. They do a really good job for those memory scenes. I think it elevates those quite a bit. Because in the original version, they were just text on images, which are good. But I think the making them more like an audiobook, I think helps a lot. It made it more memorable for me, especially like there's later scenes with, for example, Yim, Taros, Jess, and Vam, who are the 4 gods. And I think like just those memory scenes I think are elevated quite a bit. And then also the ones with the Queen of Vibra. Anyways, I'm trying to say enough without spoiling, but so I think they did a really good job.
So, to bounce off of you on that, just in general, for people who are like kind of like, oh man, I don't want to play a hard RPG like right now. Like they did introduce like a new normal difficulty in this game. It doesn't make it a cakewalk apparently, but it does make it more reasonable, I guess, in some aspects. For like it's like you'll have an easier time, while hard difficulty retains the original Apple Arcade difficulty for real gamers. But that doesn't matter.
Can I be honest and a little bit of a jerk?
Yeah, go for it.
So I played this game on the normal difficulty. I already played the original version. I have nothing to prove, so I wanted just to replay it on the normal difficulty. And I kind of felt, oh, this game is a lot easier now. I had no problems, like none at all. I mean, I kind of knew all the tricks, to be honest.
I mean, to be fair, like for both of us, it was a replay, so it's like there was nothing that we weren't like prepared.
Yeah, if it's for someone who's like a complete newcomer, doesn't know like the puzzle solutions yet, obviously they'll have a harder time.
I guess it also goes to show that like there are tricks that you should be aware of in terms of the different bosses and things like that. But also, just as a general tip, the second half of the game is wide open, and like for example, relatively early on in the second half of the game, you can do the defend the secret base mission where it's like the robot base getting attacked by a hand. You fight like 2 different bosses back to back there, and if you do that battle as soon as it's available, it's pretty damn hard, but you don't have to do it as soon as it's available. Like if you're struggling, there are probably like literally 5 or 6 other things you could be doing, like other parts of the world you could explore. So it's a bit open-ended in that regard. So I guess my tip is if you're kind of like stuck on a boss, just go somewhere else. Really specifically, for example, just as a random example, you get to the access to the second half of the Southern Forest in the second half, and the enemies there are higher level. And the way that the game scaling works is if you just fight there for a bit, you're going to gain stats and points that you can use on your skill trees and things like that. And that's kind of the tip for a lot of these sorts of open-ended games, is to kind of go to the locations where you are able to succeed and fight and gain stats or levels or progress in whatever way, and then move on to the next most difficult space, and then the next most difficult space, and eventually you're going to stair-step your way up to where you can take on stronger challenges.
A completely different game that you haven't played, Adam, but I remember people using the exact same like tip for Elden Ring. Basically, like if you get filtered at a boss, just go somewhere else for a bit.
Yeah, I'm not saying that of course Elden Ring did not invent this concept, but I think it's gonna be more popular. But it will definitely popularize this concept, because definitely in Path of Exile 2, there will be bosses that are like will feel really more difficult than previous bosses, and like you're just having like maybe an unnatural time struggling with them. And it's one of those things that you can actually go explore other zones and maybe meet up other like mini bosses, and then come back to that boss maybe with like you leveled up, or maybe you got better gear and you'll have an easier time. It's just one of those game design concepts that I think you'll see more popularized. Thanks to how successful Elden Ring was. Of like, hey, we're gonna have like these really big challenging obstacles, but we'll give you options to explore before give you places to explore to before you can you don't have to tackle it right away. You can go somewhere else and then revisit this later.
Not quite the same, but there's a similar Xenoblade Chronicles Cross coming out next year. Is open world game. Depending on which direction you go, you're going to run into enemies that are 20 levels higher than you, and like you probably should not go there quite yet. You can, maybe.
You better go there. It's awesome.
Or you could do the sicko strategy of just like running past everything and just trying to pick up like the items or whatnot.
Yeah.
So it's like
live life on the edge.
I specifically remember going into some of those like caves and just like trying just to run past everything just to pick up the items, and like
I remember
this
the
is
most
high level
doing
stuff.
that in Ys 6. There's like this one cave that's like 10 levels higher than you, and you just go there, steal all the best items, dodge all the enemies, come back, and you're good.
Yep.
When Adam finally plays Dark Souls 1, we'll tell him to go to
Oh,
the
yeah.
catacombs instead of the undead bird.
Yeah.
And have a
Let's
good
go. Okay,
time.
I'll write this down. Okay,
Yep.
catacombs.
Catacombs node first. Noted.
Yeah.
Got it.
Another tip for Fantasian, I actually have seen people. So when I was looking, I wrote some guides for Fantasian, just some collectible guides. I was wondering if I should do a walkthrough, but the way the second half of this game works, it kind of doesn't really lend itself easily to a kind of a type of walkthroughs that I like to write. But anyways, I kind of stumbled upon the Reddit for this game and looking at some of the comments there. And one thing that a lot of people seem to not realize, this is back with the Apple Arcade release, is the skill tree in the game. You can respec it freely whenever, and it's honestly very useful to do that. Where if there's, like, for example, that boss that I mentioned that is susceptible to curse, if you don't have curse like on your characters, like you don't have the skill, some people just from, I guess, experience with the genre, they might think, oh, I have to grind now and gain more skill points. I can go to my skill tree and work my way towards the curse skill. But grinding in this game, it doesn't really work that way. You can just undo some of the selections on the skill tree and give yourself your points back and then go to the other direction to get the curse skill.
It's actually really funny that you mentioned that, because I remember back around like 6 months, a year after the part 2 for Apple Arcade version came out, Linus from Linus Tech Tips apparently was playing through the game and got really upset that we specifically gave it a high score at the time, because he thought that the game was designed for you to grind so you would keep paying for Apple Arcade. And it's like, oh my god,
That's
dude,
awesome.
you don't understand how the game works.
That's funny. Holy shit. I never thought about like that mindset.
I would not trust. I would not trust him for any gaming related stuff.
It's just really funny that it's like.
So his argument that this is like an arcade trick where it's like they want the game to be drawn out, so you subscribe to the Apple Arcade for more months. Oh my god!
And I mean, I can understand how you would come to that conclusion, like theoretically, but it's like, dude, you just can't read.
Anyways, bottom line, I think Fantasian is a really cool game. I think it does something that's relatively rare in turn-based RPGs in the second half, where you have 8 characters. They all have set abilities and set skills. They have a skill tree, so there's some flexibility in which skills they have, but there is no class system. There are no like monsters to recruit or personas to fuse or anything like that. So a lot of turn-based RPGs, when you're trying to like figure out how do you beat the boss, it's like, oh, use this class or use this monster or use this ability, and like this is your easy win button. And Fantasian doesn't really have that. Now, I know I mentioned there's like intended strategies that you're supposed to use, but you kind of have to figure out where they are in the characters that you have. You can't just, class change or use a broken ability or whatever. And I think Fantasian kind of forces you, the way that it restricts your levels so you can't grind, and the way that just bosses are designed in general, to like really know what is capable in this abstracted turn-based combat system, what you are allowed to do in the mechanics that are present, and it kind of forces you to use the whole toolbox. A lot of turn-based RPGs, you can succeed relatively easily using a fraction of like the tools that are available to you, but Fantasian, especially on its original difficulty, it's kind of like each boss that you go up against, it's kind of asking, all right, here's another challenge. Can you figure out how to beat this one? And you kind of have to realize what tools are available to you and how to succeed. Or you can decide to grind and be miserable. So don't do that.
I mean, I've enjoyed both styles of games. Like,
I love flexible class systems and things like that too. But
so yeah, and because people that say like, well, I don't like this lock and key boss puzzle mechanic. I want to just use the characters I like most. And it's kind of like, that's fair, but you're not this game is not really built to support that play style.
Yeah.
Which I'm not saying that's a good or a bad thing. That's just kind of is.
I just really appreciate that there's an RPG out there that's not just a dungeon RPG, that really kind of tasks you with using your full tool set. Not just your tool set, but also like the fact that like accessories fucking matter in this game. You need to understand, like, hey, this boss does this sort of elemental attack. You should probably have like elemental resistance tools on every one of your party members. It's like, in a lot of RPGs, it feels like it's a nice to have, but not really necessary. But Fantasian's like,
It's necessary.
yeah.
But I was gonna
there is
say,
a
like,
criticism. Oh, you go ahead, then I'll go.
this is just the exact other type of game. Bravely Default 2. I forget the name of the skill, but that thief skill that scales based on your
Godspeed
speed.
Strike.
Godspeed Strike.
Yeah, like basically, as soon as I learned Godspeed Strike, that's what carried me through the rest of the game, through the optional boss, that dragon you fight at the end. Sorry, I don't know if that's a spoiler, but like that game is the epitome of just, oh, here's my I win button. I don't need to think
Yeah,
anymore,
it's
and
like
I
this-
still enjoyed the game a lot. So that was just my counter example of another game that I like a lot, but it's just completely different design philosophy.
There's a small criticism which I kind of just disagree with in general, in that you fight a boss in Fantasian and you don't necessarily know what it's going to do before you fight it, right? Because as last time I checked, none of us have like precognition or omnipotence where we can tell what's going to happen. So, for example, I was playing Fantasian and you fight the boss who is it's okay. Here's a tangent. There's a lot of bosses in this game that are like literally in the game sense itself. The Leo in the story is like creating traps to like defend his bases or his chests or his loot, and it's just like one of those bosses is like a giant fire lizard, and one of them is a big ice like demon thing, and one of them is this giant like death scythe in the sky. And in game in the world, there's literally like these are like defense devices that Leo put together. Like, how is that possible, Leo? Like, where did you get this from? Anyways,
He's him.
that death scythe boss, he does an ability that's like a big like dark element attack, and if you do not have dark resist, you will die. Like, I'm pretty sure you cannot get around it. You will die. And I have seen some criticism where people are like, well, how was I supposed to know it was going to do a big dark attack and I needed to equip dark equip? Like, now I have to reload my save and equip it and then go into the boss fight. And I'm like, yeah, I guess that's true. Like, you didn't know ahead of time what the boss was going to do, but also like that's just there's a save point right there. You see it. It's pretty easy to like, all right, second time, equip dark resist because you saw it and try again. Like, I don't know.
think gamers are just too brainwashed these days that they just don't want to like try on anything. They don't want to be challenged.
It's not that to me it's not that different from like pattern recognition in like an action RPG where you fight a boss and you realize, oh, it's going to do this ability and then it's going to do this attack and I know I need to dodge it this way. It's I think it's similar to that, only in a turn-based
I think it kind of
framing.
comes to like a weird stigma of turn-based RPGs at times, where we've had this conversation privately in staff chat, where like there's like this weird like misconception, I guess. It's like, I guess it could be true for like way older RPGs, but like this weird preconception that like in order to like be successful in a turn-based RPG, just grind. That's always the solution, is to grind. If I
ever heard that you had to grind, you're just bad.
If I can't beat this boss, it's because I'm not 10 levels over it or something. And if I'm under leveled, if I'm like 2 levels underneath it, then I have to get grind 5 more levels. It's like this weird. I don't know if I have no idea why turn-based RPGs have like this like enduring misconception of like I have to, in order to get better, I have to grind. That's the only way to get better. It's just like, it's weird to me. I don't get it. Okay, it hasn't been true for many decades.
They might have a point in like certain RPGs, like
it's like Dragon Quest II. It's like Dragon Quest II. Like, I get it.
Those they might have some merit to it. Or like Breath of Fire 2. That game is just grindy as hell, right?
For sure.
But like modern RPGs is like, they're not grindy at all. I like, one of my favorite things I read, it was like a kind of like a news article posting about the latest Trails game, and what the comment section asks is like, should I try this game? I heard they're super grindy. I'm like, the what are you talking about?
Which is really funny because Trails is like one of the RPG series in general that's like, well, I mean, you can't grind. At a certain point, the game's like, you're strong enough, you will not get any experience points.
Yeah, you're low.
On the flip side of that, if you have a character who's lower level in Trails, you just do a few fights and they'll catch up very quickly because they get like exponentially increased EXP.
It's the best kind of system to it, right? Even like Final Fantasy like 13 doesn't have any grind. It's like, I don't think grinding has been a thing in RPGs for like decades.
Yeah, I
There's
not
some
like I
games
just
that
think
still run into it, but it's like, yeah.
I just think like turn-based RPGs and like modern action RPGs are definitely held to like different standards of like people are willing to go through like the trial and error phase of like action RPGs, especially Souls likes. But when it comes to turn-based RPGs and you're asking them to retry a fight, a lot of them would just flip the fuck out, like, oh my god, I can't believe this game expects me to grind. That's the only way I can get
It's the
through
same
it.
thing in like gacha games too. Like the Honkai Star Rail when they released the boss adventuring, he was
Yeah.
kind of difficult for like the normal gamer, and people ask him to get like him nerfed day one just because they can't beat him day one or on the
Nice.
first try. You're
Uh-huh.
like, Jesus Christ! It's like,
Yeah,
thanks for getting rid of any like challenge in this game.
yeah. It's just it's kind of I feel like it's something that's never really gonna change about like kind of the unfairness and like how these two different kinds of RPGs are seen and perceived and treated. You know, whatever. I'm just glad that like a game like Fantasian, like you guys mentioned,
Exists.
exists.
It's like, and we can enjoy it, and everyone can criticize us for not liking it for some reason. It's
I
like, how
mean,
good?
and like I wanted to mention earlier, like Fantasian is like a very detail oriented RPG. Like Adam already mentioned this, but like in terms of like when you're starting to think about like party compositions and your strategy, it's kind of worth like taking notes almost on like what the skills like each character can invest in. Like just knowing like, oh, Leo can learn this or Kina can learn this. Just having scribble notes of like just kind of keeping note of like their what their tool set can be and what you can expect them to be. So like when you encounter certain types of enemies or bosses, you're like, okay, I have a general idea of like what sort of characters should I have at the beginning of battle, and what sort of characters I want to have like at later phases of the fight as that fight evolves and changes, and I have to switch up my strategy. Just little things like that, It's like that's not unreasonable to me, and also just and it also like is kind of refreshing in another way in terms of like just examining physical space in a turn-based RPG where there are like sometimes there'll be visual things that are happening with the boss itself that like those are interactable things part of the boss. Like there might be a spinning thing around the boss, and like if your attacks hit that thing that's spinning around, it will nullify it. So you actually have to time like your attacks at certain points, or like because you're kind of have to consider like the physical interactivity of a certain thing about a boss. Just small things like that. It's like really cool, but it's something you have to be keen on and not revert to your brain like going like, oh my god, I'm like 10 levels underneath this. I have to spend 3 hours grinding to get past this physical object. No, come on.
I don't know. I just find that the people just don't want to be challenged these days. Even
I
like
mean, yeah.
Final Fantasy 14
Well,
Dawn Trail, it's like the latest boss are too hard. It's like no, they're not hard, but it's like you played 5 expansions. You should be at least somewhat decent at this game now, right?
Now, like I
It's
said
like,
earlier, I don't want to be too dismissive of like anyone who does have criticisms of this game, because like I said earlier, I do think the second half sort of belies its Final Fantasy-ish like DNA, because most Final Fantasy games do not feel like this. So I don't really blame anyone for saying like this isn't what I signed up for. Because I mean, even I remember when Part 2 came out, none of us expected this. It was kind of caught us by surprise. Like we weren't expecting, this ramp up in difficulty. And I believe even James's original review starts out by saying, "I love this game, but I only recommend it to a small subset of RPG players because." It doesn't quite have the same mass appeal, and I don't necessarily mean that in a bad way, as a Final Fantasy game, which pretty much anyone can enjoy.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to. That's kind of the whole point of this discussion. Is kind of like this. We're trying to help, I guess, say what we like about this game, and this is the sort of game that it is, and that may or may not be what you were looking for. The last thing I also want to say is we haven't really talked about the story and the narrative. I do think it's the weaker part of the game. It's not really like the strength of like why you should play this game, and that's the reason why we haven't really discussed it up till now. It's okay to me. I
is it
think
like Lost Odyssey? Basically, the main story is like, yeah, it's just kind of whatever, but those memories of like a calm.
maybe to some extent, but not to the same extent. Like for example, I do like the backstory of the 4 gods in the game is kind of like a relatively simple backstory, but I think it's presented in a way that's kind of interesting and compelling. I do like the kind of like the character setup of Kina and Cheryl, and like I think that's kind of like an interesting little like, you know, component to the story. But the overall narrative, it kind of ends up being a little bit typical, and not necessarily bad, just kind of a little bit tropey, a little bit standard. It's just kind of okay. Not unremarkable, it's fine. But it's not the reason like you should play this game because it has a really good message or like a really unforgettable epic adventure. There's a reason why we've talked for half an hour or whatever on mechanics, because that's the strength of the game in our eyes.
I mean, that's not the first time we've done that. Like Saga games, similar. Like it's like, oh yeah, I guess we should talk about the story now. Or if we didn't have the podcast at the time, but like a Saga-like game, Last Remnant. It's like one of my favorite games. The story is actually probably
that story is actually kind of shit.
Mediocre.
Yeah, that's awful.
But that game is awesome.
To me, like a game with a bad story, but really like a good, fun gameplay loop. Sorry, I cringe when I say that, or hook. But like that can carry it. Where if a game has a good story, but it's just awful to play, that's to me just harder to I guess
recommend.
Compartmentalize. Yeah.
I have like two example of it. I think of a game that has a very good story but very crappy gameplay would be like Death End Request. And then and then a game with like a very good gameplay and very shitty story would be like Fire Emblem Conquest. It's like the absolute dog shit story I ever read, but I love the gameplay though. It's like, but in the end, I still rather go back to play Fire Emblem because I came here to play a game.
Kind of on that note, Tales of Graces is coming out soon, and that game is another one of those.
That's actually a really good
holy shit!
Yeah,
I think that story is like almost so bad it's good. Almost.
You don't like the friendship tree? Who doesn't like the friendship tree? What the fuck?
And if you go into Tales of Graces sort of expecting like just treat it like a comedy, even if it's trying to be serious, like. Anyway, but also Death End Request, isn't the new one more like visual novel?
I haven't tried the new one.
No, the new one's not. Is it even out yet in Japan? I don't.
No, it's like a spin-off. It's like a roguelite.
Oh, it's a roguelite. I'm trying to remember. I knew it was different.
If they make a game where there's no gameplay, I'll stick with that because the gameplay.
Yeah, I tried to get to Death End Request when I was like, this is a really cool story. When it's a visual novel, it's great. Anytime I have to interact with the game, I get really sad.
Yeah, that's like the worst part about it.
So, man, I tried. I really tried.
Flipping gears a little bit, I am really curious to see how like Square Enix, when they come to like their reporting on this quarter of the fiscal year, like what they have to say about it, because they've released Romancing Saga 2 remake, which the only metric we have are like Steam reviews and Steam concurrency, which are both really good. Like for some weird reason, like it's one of the higher Square Enix games on Steam in terms of concurrency, and also like one of the best reviewed games on Square Enix on Steam.
I think it's overwhelmingly positive, which is both. This is something I think. Oh no, it's. Oh wait, sorry, I pulled up Minstrel Song. Wrong one.
Minstrel Song is also extremely good.
But like overwhelmingly positive is both a percentage and it also includes like a minimum number of reviews. I forget what it is, but it's got 2,000 reviews, basically overwhelmingly positive. I'm about halfway through Romancing Saga and I'm enjoying it a hell of a lot. But
also Dragon Quest came out, and we actually just got a news update on that it sold 2 million. More on anyways.
It's really funny because like when you think about that 2 million thing, it's like over 800,000 of that is like from Japan alone.
Yes,
yeah. So it's a really funny. Just it's cool. It did well, but it's also of course Japan's going to show for it.
We never got. We were wondering. I remember we were discussing will it, won't it at the time. Did we ever get the 3 million update for Rebirth? I think we got.
I don't think Rebirth ever gave any sales numbers ever.
Oh, none at all. Yeah. I swear we heard 2 million.
I think people based on like PlayStation accounts or something, because it's a PlayStation exclusive. They're like, there's been 200 or 2 million accounts that have played it or something. 2 million
Okay.
seems to be like it was like the number that was floating around, but it wasn't ever like
But not
official.
official, right?
But also Fantasian, and so like Square Enix's current media term plan, they kind of talked about how they cut some projects, how they're focusing on quality, not quantity. So it kind of makes you wonder, well, what about these sort of smaller scale games going forward? This quarter had 3 of them, and so I'm curious to see like what they have to say about it, and if where they go from here. Because
There was
what Square Enix
go for
games
it.
are currently announced that are probably coming out next year? I can think of one. That's Dragon Quest 1 and 2 HD remake. The only other Square Enix games I can think of that are currently announced are Kingdom Hearts 4 and Dragon Quest 12. And I don't think either of those are coming out next year. Maybe they'll surprise us, and they're much further along than we ever anticipated.
Kingdom
But it
Hearts
doesn't
Missing
seem
Link,
like it.
man.
Well, yeah, I was about to say Missing Link. That game got delayed. I was actually thinking it. I was thinking it. So
Yeah, I kind
Anyways,
of think like,
I'm curious.
even like, yeah, I don't know.
we'll get a PC port for Rebirth probably at some
For
point.
sure.
But
Just tell me if the Final Fantasy Tactics remaster is real.
yeah, there are the rumors of Final Fantasy Tactics and Final Fantasy 9. How long
Yeah.
ago was that NVIDIA leak? That's like
Ugh.
5-6 years, or is it?
I've heard so many different things for 9. Like it started small scale, and then they like scaled it up, or they reshifted it to scale it down, and like
There was a
went
cartoon
internal
at
to
one point.
external, or external to internal. It's just like I've heard every single possible permutation of rumors.
Yeah,
that
they're
no matter what
it
happens,
Studio Kara, and Anno is writing it now. It's crazy.
no matter what happens, someone's gonna have like all the coins flip heads up and be like, "Yep, I called it." Like it's pretty good.
Of course. The Famitsu did an interview with Sakaguchi just this last week, and he mentioned during that interview that he's working on a new project with the Fantasian team. But that's all he said is like he's working on a new project with them. I think there was a trademark for Fantasian too, right?
Yeah, there was a trademark leak for something called like Fantasian Dark Edge or something. So I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, so we don't know what that is, but
But
maybe it's
probably,
a follow up. Maybe
yeah. I would
So-
assume it's probably a follow up.
I would, God, just even if you're not getting Fantasian and you're listening to this, you need to email Square Enix and tell and Miss Walker and tweet Sakaguchi and be nice about it. Tell them please release a diorama gallery viewer for Fantasian Neo Dimension. I don't care if you get the game, just let them know that the people want it. Please, I want it. And if there's gonna be a follow up to Fantasian, please have that as well, because there's obviously. I think the dioramas are a core of that, the part of the identity of that game. I don't think they would give that up in a follow-up.
Well, that covers it for the 2 games we were going to talk about on this podcast. Thanks, Josh, for talking Exile 2, and thanks, Adam and James, and of course, Josh, the rest of the whole cast, for talking Fantasian Neo Dimension.
Oh yeah, but before we move on, did you guys get to mess around with that battle music selector at all? I didn't turn it on.
I didn't bother with messing with it because it's like, I mean, it's cool, and that. Well, I don't really
I don't even
have
know
any
if it's
feelings
cool.
on it.
I am not really a fan at all in general for anything crossover anywhere. I don't like
Mhm.
it. I don't like collaboration events. I don't like crossovers. I hate it. It kind of makes me think like, oh, why make a good thing if you can just reference another good thing or whatever.
I also not a
but-
big fan of it.
But I think this soundtrack here is like Amatsu's soundtrack is really good in this game. But I do think the battle themes, there's like the regular battle theme, which you actually won't hear very often, and the Dimension battle theme are probably some of the weaker tracks.
Which you hear all the time.
So like I actually don't mind it if someone kind of like just kind of gets tired of the battle tracks and they're like, let me just put on this kind of random sound selector for Final Fantasy games. It's fine. I think the better music is the music outside of the battle.
But no, like in my opinion, it's like when it comes to music for a video game, I would use whatever the game uses. I wouldn't use like a different game BGM because I feel like that's the game's identity with the soundtrack, right? If you use it like a different soundtrack, it feels like the game kind of lost its identity, in my opinion. At least that's for me.
So like with how Fantasian handles it, from what I understand, like the music selector brings 3 tracks. It's like the normal battle theme, the Dimension battle theme, and like a boss battle theme.
I think
those like
that sounds
I
right.
think- okay, and those are like different tracks. Okay.
I had
Yeah.
forgotten how hard the final boss track goes. The real one.
Yeah, the real one. Yeah, I need to make time to replay that I'm busy.
I probably won't replay it, but I do appreciate it for doing something like there's really not a good single point of comparison. Like, oh, Fantasian is like other game. Like there's really not a clear like analog for it, which I think I appreciate more than anything. We do have a handful of features up on the site. Of course, we have kind of a refreshed review from the Apple Arcade version that James kind of made an addendum to put up on the site. I believe Mikhail put up a like a Switch and Steam Deck feature up on the site for
Switch and
Fantasian.
Xbox.
Switch and Xbox. Okay.
Apparently, the Switch version has really
And-
bad load times.
Yeah.
We actually do have a fair bit of news this week, primarily coming out of the what do they call it? PC gaming show looking forward 2024. That's not
PC
Most
gaming
Wanted.
show Most Wanted. They've done this
Most Wanted
at least one other year, maybe 2 other years.
right. So we have a lot of news coming out of that, and then of course going into the Q1 timeframe. We already talked about the. Oh no, we didn't talk about that. Sorry, take that out. My bad. So out of the PC gaming show, this is kind of an arbitrary order here, but the biggest headline that I decided to list first was the announcement of a sequel to Moonlighter. So this is from Digital Sun. Moonlighter released in 2018. They announced Moonlighter 2, The Endless Vault, and the big difference here is that they went from the pixel art style from the first game to like an isometric 3D art style here, though it is very clearly still the same like art direction as Moonlighter, unmistakably, as someone who's played the base game. So this is I don't know if this was expected or like because I liked Moonlighter, but I wasn't following it or hawking it for a sequel, so I don't know if this was a surprise or expected or somewhere in between. But kind of just a neat announcement from a game that I do know kind of gathered a pretty big kind of cult following. I don't know if I enjoyed Moonlighter 1 enough to immediately circle this on our calendar. It's slated for PlayStation 5, Xbox, and PC at some point in 2025. But I do know a lot of people, including my girlfriend, who are very excited for this.
That's cool. Yeah. I wonder what the reception is to the its new visual style, because I know a lot of people like the original look of Moonlighter. So I wonder if this new shift is being positively received or not. It's always a big risk with these kinds of sequels when you do that.
I think it's very faithful. It manages to change the art style while being faithful, which is a tough needle to thread.
Yeah,
But it's unmistakably the same like art direction.
definitely the same. Like
Um,
it kind of retains that aesthetic that I think the same
mhm.
one.
There's a few other announcements in the PC gaming show. The second one that I've listed here is a Celtic-inspired CRPG. Actually, was this part of the PC gaming show or is this separate?
It
That's part of
was.
it.
This
Yeah.
It was part of it. Okay, sorry, my bad. But yeah, Celtic-inspired CRPG called, it's a little bit of a mouthful, Legends of Awen, Rise of the Fianna. And the intro trailer for this is only 30 seconds long. It does show some things that I would say approach gameplay, though I can't tell if it's gameplay or just like animation demo. But the main thing here is that this game is what it's not announcing a release, it's announcing a plan to introduce a crowdfunding fundraiser in Q1 of next year. So that's kind of the goal, and that's the next thing on the developer. The developer is self-publishing at the moment called Hawkswell Studios. That's why they're going to crowdfunding. So at some point that'll be coming next year. They do have a Steam page already for the game. There's really not a lot to like. This is a pretty narrow look at. I have not pulled to see if they have a Kickstarter or anything quite up yet to pull any other like details out of it. But it seems like this is pretty early. But were able to get platformed at the PC gaming show, so clearly they've got a lot of support behind it. So will be interesting to see the crowdfunding support to see if what they set their target to and if they're able to reach that.
Yeah, there are like 4 bullet point key features that they highlight as like classless character creation, non-violent encounter resolution, romanceable companions, and choices and consequences. And like their statement on like this like why do a crowdfund is like it's like to expand the planned number of player choices and the depth and impact of their content from their original scope. So like they clearly like want to have a bigger scope to this game, but just need that extra help from the crowd, from the public to kind of get it over the finish line. Seems like.
Yeah, so I was trying to poke and say like did they specify Kickstarter? I mean, I always kind of assume Kickstarter, but that's not the
They,
only
they, they say
option.
they say crowdfunding campaign. I don't know, but
Yeah.
they haven't really specified if it's Kickstarter or not. But I assume it is. But obviously, nothing is up yet because it's
Right.
Q1 2025 for that crowdfunding campaign.
Yeah, so I was gonna just see if there's any other details to pull out of there, but I don't think it's up yet. It's expected to launch in Q1. And the last one here is a new title from developer Moth Atlas and publisher Midwest Games. The name of the game is Tombwater. When I look at this, it is a 2D Souls-like, but to describe it to those, since this is an audio podcast and not a visual one, it looks like Hyper Light Drifter meets like Van Helsing. That's like that's kind of what I see when I look at this. So it's a top down guys wearing like a brimmed hat and a cape / trench coat, wielding fighting zombies, wielding rifles and guns and things like that.
Apparently, the developer's previous project was Yarntown, which was literally a demake of Bloodborne. So definitely like a Souls-ish like fan making a game with 2D pixel art.
They say Souls. They say Souls-like, but I see like I said, Hyper Light Drifter, which I guess some people did compare that to Souls too. But I think to me that's more of a direct comparison in terms of like
everything's a Souls-like if you think about it. If you
enough. That's probably the word we've said most on this podcast this year. So I apologize if you're tired of hearing it, but that's what they have marketed as. So we're just the
it's a video game, so it's a Souls-like.
Fantasian is a Souls-like.
That's right. It's hard, so it's a Souls-like.
Yeah, but right now this is slated only for PC. At some point, they've announced just 2025. They've got a Steam page with the trailer and some initial screenshots.
There's some cool enemy designs, like some cool bosses in this. Like there's like almost like a Bed of Chaos-esque boss called like the Misbegotten Moss. It's a very cool vibe that they're going. 2D Western Souls-like is how they describe
misbegotten. That word, I learned that in Elden Ring, which is a Souls-like. See,
as soon as you said the word Souls-like, I was watching the trailer and the guy just pulls a shotgun and shoots something. It's like, okay,
yeah,
Bloodborne-like. We also a lot of other trailers for already announced games at the PC gaming show, Most Wanted 2024. One of the big ones was Kingdom Come Deliverance II got a new story trailer, and alongside the story trailer I think is pretty neat in terms of just showing like the breadth of animations and just kind of the production values of the game. But Warhorse has also announced that they're pushing up the release date to February 4th. Was it originally slated for February 10th, 11th? It got moved up by about a week.
I think it was a week. So, yeah.
So
February was like.
Yeah, February 4th now, and that's kind of what other one got moved? There was Pirate Yakuza.
That was February 28th, and then it got moved up to the 21st because something else decided to release on the 28th.
Yeah, and that's Monster Hunter Wilds, if you're not reading between the lines. So, yeah, February is still equally packed, but just things kind of got shifted around over the last few months. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, of course. We've had a lot of story and gameplay trailers for that, and now it's going to be releasing 2 weeks ahead of Avowed, 3 weeks ahead of Like a Dragon, and 4 weeks ahead of Monster Hunter.
Avowed also has a lot of Xbox first-party stuff is doing this now, but it's like early access, like 5 days early, something.
Yeah, even not in our purview, but if you bought early, you could play Indiana Jones, but otherwise it's
not with ray tracing or path tracing.
Yeah, path tracing.
Yeah, that's right. Oh god, I tried to forget about that. It's so bad.
Interesting stuff. Yeah.
It's been really funny how the Indiana Jones stuff, people have been thinking, wait, doesn't it have ray tracing? But what do you mean it doesn't have ray tracing? It's like, oh man, they just confused people with that whole thing.
It's over. Yeah. But
I've heard really good things. That's definitely a game like that I want to squeeze in like on the holiday break. I did really enjoy the Wolfenstein titles, and like that heard people say this is surprise immersive sim, which is kind of like RPG. It's like the cousin of RPG, where it's a similar genre that's hard to pin down exactly what it means, but everyone kind of has their own opinion of what it is.
I've seen people comparing it to Thief or Dishonored. Like, okay.
And I think the biggest like praise I've heard about it that got me interested was like I played like 10 hours of this game. I never really got to like 2 combat encounters or something like that. I'm like,
I
that's
heard
really
someone say like,
interesting.
I think I fired my gun 8 times in my last play
Yeah,
session or whatever. And it's kind of interesting because the fact that it's machine games and the fact that it's being described compared to other immersive sims, those two things are selling me way more than like Indiana Jones. I'm like, does anyone under 30 really care about Indiana Jones? But like, I'm
Okay.
fine with it. It's just that there's other two things I value much more. Anyways,
I gotta say though, I really appreciate that Digital Foundry did the comparisons because they recreate some of the scenes of like Raiders of the Lost Ark in that game, and it's really insane to me how well Troy Baker was able to get close and nail down like young Harrison Ford with his voice acting in
that's
that. I was
pretty
like,
neat.
wow, that's really like they did like a direct comparison between like playing the clip of the original, then playing it back in the game. I'm like, oh wow, that's crazy.
This next one we talked about actually last week or 2 weeks ago. We were talking about Owlcat Games. Obviously, they announced earlier this year that they were going into publishing, and one of the titles they were publishing was Shadow of the Road, which is kind of like their feudal Japan steampunk crossover title. I'm not sure whatever you want to call it, with like Robo Scorpions and things like that. So they released a new gameplay trailer for Shadow of the Road, which kind of goes into a lot of the traversal and locations. So not combat, it shows just the isometric viewpoint, the party,
Yeah,
snow
it's a pretty
biome,
much a
forest
pure
biome.
gameplay trailer. Like it's literally just a couple of clips of gameplay, which is cool.
The thing is, there's a lot of gameplay trailers. There's another one later on the podcast that I thought was really poor. This one actually shows a decent amount of stuff.
This is
Just
one that I hope kind of rooting for because I really like the premise of it. It's like an alternate history sort of premise, but it mixes like samurai and with like mech robot, like kind of almost steampunk-ish
yeah.
designs. I'm like that's really neat. I hope this project comes together and comes out in a really good
And
state.
the production values for being like sometimes at least I think this isn't as true as much anymore, especially in the post Baldur's Gate 3 era. But there was a time 8 to 10 years ago where if you said your game was isometric or like a CRPG in that classic sense, like, oh, that means it has crappy production values. And that was never fair, not even then. But like I look at this and like these ones, like these environments look really detailed and pretty vibrant. Like I just enjoy how this game just looks. But yeah, slated, not, or I guess it's not slated, not dated yet, but we do I'm rooting for Owlcat here, and of course the developer, another Angle Games. I'm definitely keeping my eye on this one.
Yeah.
Here is another a debut gameplay trailer for a game that was announced, I believe, this summer during the Summer Games Fest window. The game is Wild Tactics. It was announced with like an animated short, and it was basically announced as like an XCOM like, where all the characters, for lack of a better term, are personas or furries or anthropomorphic characters. So that it's going kind of for that Zootopia character vibe. And we got the new debut trailer for Wild Tactics at the the PC gaming show just last week. So it looks kind of like XCOM-ish. It looks almost more pure turn-based tactics rather than tactical RPG, which that line is very thin, narrow. But it looks neat enough, and it has like a pretty unique kind of color palette and art style.
I like how this mobster boss is like a giant like hippo in a white suit with a red bow tie. I don't know, that just seems appropriate for like a mob boss.
Well, it's just cool to see this sort of art style, and both like just the design style in general, because these sort of tactical games really tend to go for like hyper realistic or super gritty, where this is the exact opposite of that. It's I guess there's the Mario Rabbids one, I suppose. This is a
Right.
third branch, but
I
yeah,
mean,
no release date for this, but it's cool to see some gameplay for it. They're calling this pre-alpha footage, so it's still pretty early in development. We're gonna
there's
say that, Josh.
no, I was just gonna say like it's just really like cool seeing like more of these kinds of like for lack of elegance in the way I'm gonna say this, but like it's cool to see more of like these kind of games for that cater to that furry audience, but like they're like really competent games like we just mentioned that game that was like PSO like last week. I forgot what it's called already. Was it Alyssa? No, was it? I forgot, but there was like a really popular one on Steam that released
Adam, what was
recently
the
that's
game
kind of
Junior was playing?
yeah, what was that?
All what was it?
Our brains are mush.
We're cooked. But that game, the one that played like FPSO that you gave to Junior, but it's
Mhm.
just like
Yeah. Well,
he'll
just
show up for it. And
generalizing that, it's just cool to see a game that says like we are not trying to appeal to everyone here. We know
right.
like we're not trying to like dumbing it down so like everyone will like this game. Like
Atlas.
no, we have a niche. Oh, that's what it's called, Atlas.
Atlas.
Yeah,
Atlas.
but yeah,
Okay.
we have a niche that we know what we want to make and we know like what people want us to make and we're just going to make that for us. Yeah, is that going to limit our sales potential? Like maybe, but we don't care. We want to make this type of game and here it is. So it's just cool to see more studios being willing to do that.
They also mentioned like they'll have like a playable roster of 12 characters and they all play differently. Like the two examples that they give in this gameplay trailer is like one is like a very straightforward brute tank class battering ram type of guy named Blackjack. And then the
Mhm.
other one is like a more stealthy type indirect encounters taking out enemies with the backlines. It's like I guess a fox named Kiora. I think that's a fox. I'm not sure if it's a mouse or a fox. I can't tell. Sorry.
I don't know either. I'm sorry.
It's the on our page. It's the third picture in our gallery. On the I don't know if it's a fox or a rat.
I'm going to guess Fox.
That's me too.
Mhm. There's three more trailers here. These three weren't as interesting. First one is Flint, Treasure of Oblivion. This is the CRPG nautical pirate themed game that has been delayed a few times. It's currently still slated for December 17th. They started releasing these new trailers, and we talked about it's probably the first of a series. They did like a crew management trailer in late November. Now they're doing a trailer called Cards and Dice. Very short. It just shows like cards are kind of like traits or talents or perks that you can kind of act like. It shows one that immobilizes an enemy. They show a card that allows you to re-roll like a dice roll. The dice roll itself is very reminiscent of like Baldur's Gate 3 where it shows a d20. So it's the trailer's too short to really glean too much more of it, but it's just saying like, okay, there's these both deck building slash dice roll mechanics somehow baked into this game in some fashion. Uh, it's hard to really extrapolate much
Yeah,
more than
so
that from
this
there
this
because these
game, it
trailers
feels
are
like
like
they
a
had a
minute long.
handful. They had a handful of like kind of more typical trailers, and then after they delayed it, after they delayed the game, they just kind of have these sort of like bit trailers of different components.
Micro
This is
trailers,
one of
yeah.
those. Yeah.
So, I mean, deck building, having kind of a deck build, it actually kind of reminds me of, remember Adam Fey Tactics? How it was a turn-based
Good game.
RPG, but you would have like these cards that you could access at any time that would do different, affect different parameters of the battle. This doesn't seem like it's quite that, but it seems similar to it, where there's the base mechanics of your characters and classes and gear, but then you've also got these, this deck that you can have access to. I don't know how it ties into the other gameplay systems, but it's at least parallel to them. So interesting enough, but trailer doesn't really go into a lot of detail about specifically how it's implemented. So I'm guessing we'll see one more gameplay trailer before it releases if it's not delayed. We'll see. The other two, this next one, Empyreal, looks like Empyreal. This was announced just a month ago. This is a debut project for UK developer Silent Games. They're announcing this as basically, again, a hardcore action game. Do they call it a Souls-like? I don't want to call it a Souls-like if they don't. Nope, they just call it a challenging action game. So okay, and then but they've had an intro trailer, and then they've had this new trailer, which is like a pure gameplay trailer. The gameplay trailer also has like a very enigmatic, mysterious voiceover that tries to like give you some lean to what the premise might be, but it's a little bit too vague to really have anything to really latch on to. I know the developers have stated that they're really interested in making a game with a sophisticated narrative. So it seems like what they're trying to communicate here, but there's too much that's not nailed down that it's hard to really latch onto. Uh, but we had a new look at that. It's slated to come out for PlayStation 5, Xbox, and PC next year. I'm interested, but I just haven't seen enough yet to really know how interested I am. And this last trailer, this is for a XCOM like called Menace. This was announced last year at part of the Gamescom. As far as I know, it kind of went dark and then it reappeared with a new gameplay trailer for the PC gaming show. This is from the same developer as Battle Brothers Hooded Horse, which I know has kind of a strong cult following, but I don't know much about. So this trailer is really kind of, I always hate to say it's a bad trailer, but it's not a good trailer. It shows like a single combat encounter. It shows like these squads that are doing like their basic combat animations, like firing missiles, calling in airstrikes with these like amateur voice acting like battle chirps, whatever you want to call it. The press release itself is actually more interesting. It talks about how there's a little bit of randomization, how it's a game that it seems like it's the sort of game that you're expected to play through like multiple times, and there's permutations for how like the game actually unfolds based on like random character selections and things like that. I don't know if that's similar to like how Battle Brothers did it. So that's kind of where I feel like I need to know how Battle Brothers work to see if this game is pulling from those same ideas. Uh, but the trailer itself, it's separately from the details in the press release, kind of just shows like a competent squad based tactical game. It's like, okay, that looks fine, I suppose, but it doesn't really show me why I should be interested.
Yeah, this I'm
But
actually
there's
watching the
mechs.
trailer now. This trailer
That's
is
why you should be interested.
this trailer is not
Surely.
good. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, look, man.
It's just boring, but
They need to show more mechs. That's why I get it.
yeah, so back in Gamescom last year, they said procedurally generated multi-mission operations. Every run of Menace plays differently from the last. A large and randomized selection of characters to talk to. Like it just seems like there's almost like a roguelike-ish where you would go through and the runs change every like permute every time you go through, but they haven't they've only said that, they haven't shown that, but maybe that's how Battle Brothers works. I'm not sure. If you know, please comment on
They
this
need to show the G Quacker. That's
There you
what'll
go.
get it off the ground.
That was it for PC gaming show trailers. Independent of that, we have a few other updates. We already talked about Dragon Quest III HD 2D surpassing 2 million units. So that was kind of the big Square Enix update. In terms of Square Enix updates, Visions of Mana, of course, released back in late August. We then got a report, if you remember, from Bloomberg, I believe, originally, saying that the NetEase studio, Ouka, O-U-K-A, Ouka studio, basically was going to be shuttered or at least severely downsized, announced like a day after the game released, which we said was just heartbreaking and just kind of sucks. And it's also kind of like not a surprise. This whole year has been full of stories like that. But if there's any glimmer of good news here, this is the announcement that much of the Visions of Mana staff members, including the game's director, Ryosuke Yoshida, are moving over to Square Enix. And obviously, this is a game that was published by Square Enix and developed by the NetEase studio. So the fact that the talent is able to find a new home with the studio that published their last game, the best we could hope for coming out of that Bloomberg report, that NetEase was no longer going to support that style of game development. So very good to see. I mean, it's not good to see, but it's good to see in the context of the alternative that the studio is being shuttered, and we're glad at least the directors and some of this talent is going to be able to land on their feet.
Yeah, hopefully they can, land on an awesome project in Square Enix and see what they're cooking up there. I mean, they're clearly a very talented studio, so I wonder if there's any, hope of like them collaborating with each other again, like within like the same almost team, building another game together, like because that establishing that rapport already, instead of like going for square one again within a completely new team, would probably be beneficial.
Here's a small, just a little bit piece of news. Dragon Age Veilguard, of course, released in late October. Its character creator is now standalone, which I think is becoming more and more prevalent these days. Of course, Monster Hunter Wilds kind of had a separate character creator in front of its beta event. I know there's been other games that have had the character creator accessible before the game launched.
Dragon's Dogma
So that-
2.
Yep.
Oh, right, that was it. Yeah, I'm the sort of person where like I spend so little time in character creators, but I know there are on the opposite coin, there are people that spend hours and hours in there.
Yeah.
So to me, this go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, it makes sense for most games to try and release like the character creator separately, like before the game launches, because it's marketing. People will share the characters they make on like socials. Like you used to be like Twitter, now it's obviously going to be Blue Sky, and for a lot of games, that's just like a major free marketing push like right before the game comes out, and I mean, all power to them. It makes sense.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
obviously, like I think it was I forget if it was Neo or some other game where you could. I mean, it was multiple games, but you like when you can share character like codes or loadouts. People say, "Here's 2B" or "Here's Geralt of Rivia," like sort of things where people like create like their favorite characters in these character creators. So the fact that Dragon Age is releasing it after the game, of course, missed opportunity for that pre-release marketing, but still, it's a good nice to have, I suppose, for just the catalog sales. If people down the road are interested in trying out the game, they can create their character before deciding to purchase. Also, I guess Dragon Age 2, you can now get Hawk's outfit.
Let's
Uh,
go.
hell yeah. The rest of this podcast is just kind of wrapping up some December and Q1 2025 dates. Released just a few days ago. Girls Frontline 2 Exilium is now available on PC.
Yeah, PC and mobile. I believe the metrics for that is I think they've gotten over 2 million players since its launch globally. So,
I don't know anything about this game. It looks like waifu XCOM. Am I
yeah, it's
correct?
anime girl XCOM pretty much.
Okay.
In some aspects, also like a girlfriend simulator. Very like a lot of the interaction with the girls is like from first person perspective. So they have a lot of animations for flirting, being you know.
Suggestively riding a rubber ducky.
Yes,
There you go.
but yeah. Well, I know a lot of people are playing it, so
Indie game Breath of Death 7, The Beginning Reanimated. That's a long title. Is launching for Steam on December 12th. I guess this is a remake of a game from about 15 years ago from the
oh yeah, those are
developers of
old
Cosmic
games.
Star.
Those were old games. I haven't heard of Breath of Death in forever. I was like, what were those games? I was like, oh, yeah.
This is Zeboid. It's one of their first games redone.
That's Cosmic Star Heroine, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So the Zeboid Games was, I forget the guys' names. I'm sorry. There's two of them that were like the leads of it. Robert Boyd and someone else.
Bill Sternberg.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. Sorry, Bill. Anyways, the Zeboid Games no longer exists in that form. Like Bill left, and this is his game. He basically just created a remaster for it. So Breath of Death
Mhm.
7 is supposed to be like it's ironic or whatever. There is no Breath of Death 1
I was
through
gonna
6.
say,
Yeah.
yeah, right.
I actually did see on Twitter, I think it was literally Twitter, I posted this and someone was like, God damn it, I thought that said Breath of Fire.
Yep.
Uh, it's working as intended. Their title. I mean, It's kind of one of those like early like.
It was an Xbox
indie-
arcade. Remember Xbox
yeah,
Live Arcade? Yeah, it was one of those.
yeah. Very early indie game
Yeah.
sort of deal, and then like very JRPG inspired, but also be a parody of.
Yeah, it's a parody game.
Yeah, so it was very fresh at the time. Obviously, we've seen a million
Billion,
of those since
yeah.
then. Yeah.
Robots at Midnight. This is a game that Adam previewed during Summer Games Fest. Will be launching on January 29th for Xbox and PC. Adam, this was
Kind of a
Souls-like,
simple. I even said in my preview.
I'm so sorry, everyone.
I even said in my preview. So I played this at Summer Game Fest. I was like, I don't want to call this a Souls-like, but then when they started describing the game to me, they were like, "So this is a Souls-like." Like, oh, okay.
All right.
You're like, all right, fair enough.
Well, if they give you a seal of approval, it's on them then.
Yeah, that's their words, not mine. It's a very cartoony, kind of simple Souls-like. I have a feeling that people who like Souls games, this is going to be too simple for them, but it's kind of meant to be like a kid's version in a way. At least it feels like it. I don't know. It seemed okay, but I have a feeling it could be kind of thin. But yeah, it's kind of a cartoony, approachable, action-ish game, and apparently inspired by Souls. So
There you go.
yeah, you're like, it's got like sort of like an 80s cartoon. You're on like a scrapyard planet fighting these kind of tinker robot, like scrapyard robot type enemies. So
It's got a visually pleasing art style.
mm-hmm.
It's kind of like the Psychonaut-ish, at least Psychonauts 2, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there was a gameplay trailer alongside the release date announcement that we have up on the site. Citizen Sleeper 2, we learned around the summer frame, and again in that Summer Games Fest window, that it was planning for release in early 2025. At the show, they announced that it's going to be releasing on January 31st.
That's cool. I'm excited.
Mhm.
That it's kind of interesting because like a lot of their messaging on this is like how this game is definitely more RPG than the first game, where like your dice are definitely more involved in your actions. Like but they didn't really get into like the specifics of that, but they were definitely trying to emphasize like, hey, there's definitely more of a role playing element in this game more so than the first.
If I had
It's
infinite time, I would play the first game. I heard
Yeah, the first-
everything I've heard about the first game is good. So
yeah, first game's not like it doesn't take too much game, but yeah, I mean we've all had a billion other things lined up. But I love the first game. I'm definitely gonna. I don't know if I'm gonna be there day one on the second game, depending on what I'm doing, but I'm excited nonetheless. It's awesome. And they also like brought back the demo for this game for a limited time. So if you're until December 8th, so depending on when you listen to this podcast, it's either gonna be up for a few more hours or already gone. I hope you found that useful.
We have a release date for. Is it wrong to pick up? Is it wrong to try to pick up girls in a dungeon full end of water and light? Oh,
I need
Camellia
you.
Myth. I miss words.
I need you to spell Fullland for us, so we make sure
Compliant.
we're compliant with Bushiroad's protocols here.
Yeah, okay. Is it wrong to try to pick up girls in a dungeon? Familia Myth, full end, Full. That's 3 L's. LLL, A and D,
Mhm.
of
Mhm.
water and light.
Wait, I thought Familiar Myth
Yeah.
was a different game. Is that like a subtitle for
It's this.
series?
No, I
It's
think it's just it's kind of it's like a weird subtitle on like part of
like
the
a
logo.
tagline.
Yeah.
Well, kind of like
yeah.
Naruto and Naruto Shippuden. Like Shippuden
Yeah.
is like a subtitle to Naruto, but it's also part of the title. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, this is a side-scrolling RPG based on the short novel, light novel. Is it a
Yeah,
light
light
novel?
novel. It's a light
Yeah,
novel.
so
Like they have a whole long title in Japanese, but it's like condensed down to Danmachi, and then
right.
the English title is that isn't
What I
wrong
just
to try
said.
to pick
Yeah.
up, etc.
Yeah, but yeah, it's
We love
coming
long
out
titles.
on. Did I bury the lead? It's coming out on February 27th, 2025 for Switch and Steam.
Monster Hunter better watch out.
That's right. This one
Yeah.
won't budge on that release date. It knows it can compete. Fuck yeah. Let's fucking go. Um, look, man. I know our listeners are like, "Oh, what the fuck is going on with this game?" It's like we have had some correspondence behind the scenes of a really dumb correction.
Oh yeah.
Or yeah, it's not. We're not the most
According to
jazzed
this,
about it.
according to the Steam page, the Familiar Myth part of the title is not actually in the title.
So it's in the logo, but not in the title of the game. Huh.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Also, when we got the email on this from Bushiroad telling us to correctly spell the game title, they did not use the "is it wrong to try to pick up girls in the dungeon." They just called it Danmachi.
Yeah.
Like, got mixed messaging here.
And valid.
Yeah.
Basically, the Fullland part, I spelled it right 6 times, and then we got called out on like the 7th, like small one that was like, "Oh, you didn't put an extra L in this.
You
Please
only put
correct."
2 L's instead of 3.
It's it's dumb. It's dumb.
Anyways, this is like a side scroller RPG.
Yeah.
I have my doubts that it's very good because Bushiroad has not given me
I
that
think-
confidence.
It's not there.
I think there's only been like one decent Bushiroad game so far, and that's the Review Starlight visual novel. And even then, that has like problems, but okay. I don't know if there's any other good like Bushiroad games outside of like the Bang Dream mobile. I can't think of one.
And the last headline here is a game that was revealed during the summer Nintendo Direct, 100 Line Last Defense Academy. This is from 2Kyo Games. I forget the artist's name, but I always associate it with Danganronpa. It is going to be releasing on April 24th in the West. I guess
Yeah,
worldwide.
Yeah, it's
with
on
the Switch
Wormhog.
version being published by XSEED Games.
Yes. And then I think the PC one is going to be published by Aniplex, I believe. And the
Mm.
Danganronpa artist named Rui Komatsuzaki.
Gotcha.
You know, it's sort of unfair.
What's up?
On the same day as this press release, there was a press release for Tribe 9, which is like a totally different type of game. It's like a mobile, like free-to-play mobile PC game, but it's got the same art
And
style.
different developer.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
a different developer. That's shoot.
Akatsuki.
Yeah, Akatsuki. And like that game's more like free to play. It's got like an HD 2D pixel art style, but then it's like action battles. But it's the same artist, so like when I see them back to back, I still get confused. Like, wait, which game is which? They're
Yeah,
Two
I think
different baseball.
Tribe 9.
Okay, so
Tribe-
Tribe 9. Okay, just think of it.
Tribe 9
9
has been
baseball.
baseball.
There you go.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's kind of it sucks, right? Like it's Rui Komatsuzaki is a very, very, very talented artist, but unfortunately, they the only thing that most people in the West, at least, like associate them by is by Danganronpa because it's a very highly popular game. But like they've done other things, like Akudama Drive, for example. It's like like cool series, but yeah, it's just not really known about or as thought about as much. They've also done stuff for I think there was like some Dragon Ball games that.
well,
Also
even
did-
outside of
They
that
also
though, like
did,
how many
they
times?
also did Rain Code.
Well, how many times do you have two separate games from two different developers coming out roughly at the same time with the same artist? Like it just doesn't
Yeah.
happen very often.
Yeah, yeah, it's just a shame. It's like that's kind of like the curse. Like they're really good, but they also have a style. Like when you see their art style, you think of Danganronpa because that's the thing that's the first time or thing that everyone thinks of because it's been so popular. It's so spread to mainstream.
I don't think we have it on our podcast schedule here, but Tribe 9, they pre-registrations are now open. That's a free-to-play game. It's on Steam and
yeah.
mobile, so you can do that now. No release date yet.
Yeah, I played the demo for that game like on a Steam Next Fest. It was, that's my review. Yeah.
And I think that covers us for this episode of the Tetracast. And I believe this is our last regular recording of the Tetracast in 2024. So obviously, there's a lot of thanks to go around for that. Obviously, thanks to all the podcast participants for being here with me most weeks. I know obviously we all take weeks off if we're traveling or unwell or whatever, but it's been a pretty good solid crew. And obviously, of course, the contributors who come up onto the Tetracast whenever they have a review or have the opportunity to speak to a game that they're really passionate about. And of course, thanks to the listeners for sticking with us. So hopefully you enjoyed us tangenting into Gundam or into fighting games or whatever else we go into on this podcast. So the next time you hear from us will hopefully be in early 2025 with a Game of the Year podcast. So we'll have those features up in early January. And then, of course, not long after that, we'll resume our regularly scheduled programming, so to speak, in starting that like first or second weekend of January. So there'll be a little bit of a break from us until then. But of course, we always thank you so much for listening and supporting the site. Please leave us a comment or a rating or join our Discord, discord.gg/RPG site, or follow us on whatever social media platform you prefer, Facebook, Twitter, Blue Sky. No preference, like whatever one you like to use, we're on all of them. So give us
I
likes,
guess
give us
just as a
ratings.
consequence of this, it's always like the weird timing of like we're going to be totally absent for the Game Awards, so like we might catch up for a little bits of like whatever happens at the Game Awards or gets announced, but that's like way whenever we do a podcast in next year, you know.
I'm gonna
We'll
be
still cover it on the
busy.
site. We just
Yeah.
won't be.
Well,
yeah, you're
James,
going to
James
the
is actually
Awards, right?
going, right?
Yeah, I'm not doing the awards itself. Fucking nobody does because the tickets are overpriced.
But I mean, if
and
everyone
it's-
else is going to be in LA at the time, you might as well also be there.
Yeah. So it's like I'm gonna be there, and I actually have a few appointments for stuff I'm gonna be checking out. Not just for RPG site, but also freelance for some other outlets. So gonna be a good time.
Maybe they'll finally show Exodus gameplay. You think? Maybe.
Maybe. Who knows?
There's definitely going to be Silk Song this time, guys.
Some people have
Definitely.
been like, I think it was like Andy Robinson at VGC was like really kind of teasing. It's like, oh, I've heard that it's going to be a really good the Game Awards, which usually people don't hype it up. So the fact that we're hearing stuff like that, it's like, might be a good one.
I will not get my expectations up for the Game Awards. I mean,
Yeah.
because like it's kind of like a fundamentally identity crisis
Yeah.
type of programming.
Yeah. Will Schlick Hydrobot be there this year?
God, I hope so. Yeah,
He's
okay,
the only thing I look forward to.
which celebrities do you guys think will be there?
Idris
It's like,
Elba.
there you go. All right,
Yeah,
Keanu
that's
Reeves.
one. Keanu Reeves definitely, because he's gonna
They've,
go
they've,
double duty,
they've
and
already
he's
gone
gonna.
that well, right?
Keanu Reeves is gonna be there. They're gonna have a trailer for the movie DLC for Sonic X Shadow Generations, and he's
Oh,
also gonna say,
yeah.
"Go see Sonic the Hedgehog 3 in theaters next week."
Oh,
Was he
yeah.
the one that
that-
was in that secret leveled armored core thing?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I
And they
think
revealed the
Keanu-
Pac-Man. Have you guys seen the Pac-Man?
I saw the
Yes,
Pac-Man
yeah,
one.
teaser?
Yeah.
My favorite part about
Someone's
Pac-Man
like-
was the Dune worm.
Yeah.
yeah.
Same,
Someone's like,
actually.
this is like Bomberman. This is like Pac-Man meets Bomberman Zero or whatever.
But yeah, like I think Keanu Reeves is like the free space on the bingo card for like celebrity
go.
appearances.
Great.
Obviously, we'll still cover it on the site, but we'll have to, do any sort of catch up next year if we're going to talk about it on the podcast. But like, I'm kind of with Josh. Like, I haven't watched it live in a while, and I just, did I miss anything? And the answer is like this one small thing, maybe, and that's kind of it.
Yeah. Okay, well, that, yeah, and like Brian said, this whole podcast, this whole operation on RPG site can't happen without the support of our listeners, our readers, in general, just community. It's always nice to talk to people in our community on the Discord, like especially that's how we directly get to know people, get to understand people, see what they like, what they dislike, and just always it's always challenging every single year, every consecutive year for RPGs because more and more games try to include RPG elements in there, and then we kind of have to decide where's the line of what we're going to cover, what we're not. And ultimately, we kind of have a loaded plate because out of any genre in video games, RPGs take the longest time to complete. So all of our assignments are always going to be multi-hour endeavors. There's never going to be like this only has like a 4 to 5 hour campaign. It's like if that happens, like oh my god, it's a fucking revelation from God. It's a gift from God.
Yeah, I'm still going to somehow try and probably fail to get through the rest of Asgard's Wrath 2, which is that VR RPG that came out in December last year, so it would be eligible for our awards this year. So it's like somebody should fucking play it at least.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens. Right now, based on like the current schedule, the Game of the Year podcast recording is happening. I think as of the recording like next weekend, and then that'll get prepped up and go up sometime, which we haven't decided yet. But yeah,
Before we put it up on January 1st, but I think that's a holiday, so it's been a struggle in the past. So we might put it up like a week after January 1st.
I think last year we put it up on like the 3rd.
Oh, okay. That's a much better. I think we put it up on the 1st before, but that's kind of obviously asking a lot. But it'll be up in the first week of January is probably the window.
But yeah, but if obviously if you're listening and you think that there could be some things that we could do better, and there's always room for improvement, and we're always open to feedback. This is something. Much of our operation is like something that isn't always set in stone. Like if there'll be things that like we'll miss or not really be aware of for a long time until someone points it out and be like, "You're right. Why aren't we doing this?" Things like this, it would be more efficient, more better, interesting. So
I know
if
one
you think-
person was like, we should put background music on during our podcast. And we thought about it, we trialed it, but we didn't like it. But that's the sort of comment where it's like, why aren't you doing this? Or you should try this, or this other podcast is doing this. This is, those are the sorts of things that we're trying to be open-minded.
Yeah. So, once again, thank you guys. Thank you to the crew here and the regulars and all the guests, both contributing to the site and on the podcast, and all to our readers, listeners, and everyone who supported us, past and present, and hopefully in the future as well. We'd like to, see more of you all, and here's to the best.
Join the Discord, discord.gg/RPG site.
Mm-hmm.
Right. until you hear from us during the Game of the Year or in 2025, stay safe, take care. We'll talk to y'all later.
Log into Path of Exile 2 right now.